Chapter 2289. Not there another month passed. At this moment, Zhuan's door was knocked. Zhuan woke up from his meditation. Brother Zhua, 2 months have passed. Lord Kuang Li has also successfully come out of seclusion. Qiao Feng's voice came from outside the room. Zhuan nodded and put away the heavenly Dao blood and Dao fruit. With a wave of his sleeve, he removed the restrictions around the room and opened the door. Outside the door, Qiao Feng and Qiao Zuan stood quietly. When they saw Zhuan come out, they revealed a trace of joy. Zhuan's gaze fell on the area behind Qiao Feng and Qiao Ziyuan. He frowned slightly. He didn't see Lu Zhu's figure. Generally speaking, Lu Zhu would have arranged for them to stay here. When Kuang Li came out of seclusion, he should have brought them to Kuang Li's reception hall. However, Lu Zhu didn't appear today. Qiao Feng saw the unhappy expression on Zhuan's face. He smiled embarrassedly and said, "Brother Zhua, Brother Lu was delayed by something, so he couldn't make it. However, he already gave me the address of Lord Kuang Li's reception hall. We can go there ourselves." Qiao Ziyuan pouted her cherry lips. Clearly, she didn't like Lu Zhu's actions. Zhuan nodded. He didn't care too much about Lu Zhu. His goal this time was the river of space-time quicksand. Moreover, he heard that Kuang Li was a powerful artificer. He mainly wanted to see Kuang Li. As for that clown Lu Zhu, Zhuan didn't care too much about him. The three of them didn't waste time talking. Qiao Feng gave the address Lu Zhu gave him to Zhuan. Zhuan looked at the address and found that Kuang Li's reception hall wasn't far from here. He waved at Qiao Feng and Qiao Ziyuan, and the three of them rushed toward the address Lu Zhu gave him. Along the way, Zhuan could see cultivators in all kinds of clothes flitting by. Moreover, they were heading toward Kuang Li's reception hall. Moreover, Zhuan could see that these cultivators did not belong to the quicksand family. Brother Zhua, you are not the only one who wants to enter the river of space-time quicksand. Countless cultivators from the entire Gulen Star River want to enter as well. Not just the Gulen Star River. Even cultivators from the distant star rivers have come because of its fame. Qiao Feng seemed to have noticed the confusion on Zhuan's face and explained with a smile. Zhuan nodded in understanding. He knew very well that these cultivators did not enter the river of space-time quicksand for the space-time key. At any rate, aside from Zhuan and King Devourer, there should not be a third person who knew where the space-time key was. Previously, he had learned from Qiao Feng that the river of space-time quicksand possessed a powerful space-time law. The so-called space-time law was a combination of the space-time law and the space-time law. Besides the heavenly Dao law, the space-time law was another way to advance to the 9 steps void sky realm. Therefore, many powerful cultivators below the 9 steps void sky realm would enter the river of space-time quicksand to try. If one could comprehend the space-time law, the path to the 9 steps void sky realm would become much smoother. Of course, even if one could not fully comprehend the space-time law, being able to comprehend a part of it would greatly increase one's strength. Moreover, the river of space-time quicksand did not only have these benefits. It also contained many treasures related to space-time. Any one of these treasures could greatly increase a cultivator's strength. This was also the most important reason why so many cultivators flocked to this place. Moreover, it was said that once one entered the river of space-time quicksand, there was no concept of time or space. Many cultivators who had entered the river of space-time quicksand had gotten lost. Of course, most of those who could come out of the river of space-time quicksand had obtained a lot of good things and comprehended a certain amount of space-time law and space-time law. Coupled with a trace of luck, it was possible to leave the river of space-time quicksand. Although it was very dangerous, it could not stop the greed of many cultivators. Zhuan was not worried. He already had a foundation in the space-time law and space-time law. He knew that as long as he entered the river of space-time quicksand and comprehended it, he would definitely gain something. Even if Zhuan could not comprehend anything, he had the map provided by the Devourer Monarch. Not only did the map record the location of the space-time key, but it also recorded the route to leave the river of space-time quicksand. Therefore, Zhuan was not very worried about not being able to leave the river of space-time quicksand. Of course, Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan were more worried about Zhuan. They were worried that Zhuan would get lost in the river of space-time quicksand. However, their advice did not have much effect on Zhuan. Wild Gravel's residence was built alone on a planet full of vitality. This was a huge, maze-like palace that occupied almost one-third of the planet. The remaining two-thirds were landscaped areas with birds chirping and flowers blooming, pavilions, rockery, and waterfalls. Everything one could think of could be found here. When Zhuan and the other two entered the entrance of Wild Gravel's cave, they were stopped. A middle-aged man in a black robe walked in front of the team. He sized up Zhuan and the other two and said indifferently, "What are the three of you doing here?" Zhuan cupped his hands and said, "We are here to see Grandmaster Wild Gravel. Please let us in." The middle-aged man in a black robe narrowed his eyes and silently sized up Zhuan. After waiting for a moment, he coldly snorted and said, "You can leave. Grandmaster Wild Gravel is not in the cave." Zhuan frowned slightly. Lu Zhu clearly said that Grandmaster Wild Gravel had come out of seclusion. Why did this middle-aged man in a black robe say that Grandmaster Wild Gravel was not in? Just as Zhuan was about to say something, a stream of light flew over and a young woman in green landed at the entrance. "I want to see Grandmaster Wild Gravel," the woman in green said as she took out a lingji burning with purple flames from her spirit ring and handed it to the black-robed man. Zhuan's eyes narrowed. This lingji was no stranger to Zhuan. It was a level 6 divine herb, purple flame lingji. It could be considered a very precious divine herb. "Oh, go in. Grandmaster Wild Gravel is inside." The black-robed man put away the purple flame lingji and calmly moved aside to block the entrance. The woman in green nodded. She didn't find it strange and entered. "Why are you still here?" After the woman in green entered, the black-robed man stared at Zhuan with a tyrannical gaze and said in an extremely unfriendly manner, "Didn't you just say that Grandmaster Wild Gravel is not in? Why are you talking to that woman now?" Zhuan said calmly. "Scram!" The black-robed man coldly snorted and a powerful aura suddenly came crashing down. Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan, who were standing behind Zhuan, were shocked. This black-robed man's cultivation was really powerful. He was actually an early-stage Void Sky 8 steps expert. The two of them immediately couldn't hold on. Zhuan waved his sleeve, causing the black-robed man's crushing pressure to disperse inch by inch. On the other hand, Zhuan stomped his right foot. Instantly, an invisible ripple spread out from the center of his right foot. Bang! Chapter 2290. Gift Delivery. How dare you act so presumptuously in Master Quangli's place? The black-robed man was furious, but he soon fell silent because Zhuan took out a huge starry sky divine vein and suspended it in midair. "Take it. Can I go in now?" Zhuan's eyes were calm. From the behavior of the green-robed woman just now, it could be seen that if one wanted to enter, they needed to give a gift. Therefore, Zhuan couldn't break the rules. He just taught the black-robed man a lesson. Top-grade starry sky divine vein. The black-robed man was obviously a person who knew his stuff. He immediately recognized the starry sky divine vein that Zhuan took out, and his eyes revealed a greedy look. Zhuan threw the starry sky divine vein to the black-robed man and stared at him coldly. The black-robed man checked it with his divine sense. After confirming that there was no mistake, he put it away and immediately made way for Zhuan politely. Zhuan's gift was definitely much better than the green-robed woman's. Coupled with the powerful aura that Zhuan just showed, the black-robed man wasn't a fool. If he still wanted to go against such a powerhouse, wouldn't he be asking for trouble? On the other hand, Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan, who were following behind Zhuan, were shocked. They knew that Zhuan was very powerful, but they didn't expect him to be so powerful. The black-robed man in front of them was definitely on the same level as their Chao family's patriarch, Chao Xianbing, but he was actually intimidated by Zhuan's aura. In addition, Zhuan didn't hesitate to take out a top-grade starry sky divine vein. It could be seen that Zhuan was an extremely wealthy cultivator. After all, this starry sky divine vein was definitely a very important treasure in their Chao family. But Zhuan casually took it out and gave it away. Let's go in. After the black-robed man stepped aside, Zhuan led Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan into the door. Quangli's cave was indeed very complicated. It was full of twists and turns, and was surrounded by powerful restrictions. Zhuan could see that these restrictions were all very confusing. Even if it was Zhuan, if he was not careful, he might also be deceived by these restrictions. Fortunately, after the three of them entered the door, a tall maid with a smile on her face appeared and led the three of them into the depths of the cave. After walking for about an hour, the maid brought the three of them to a huge square. At the end of the square, there was a magnificent palace. At the junction of the palace and the square, there was a white jade staircase with a 45-degree angle. Zhuan counted and found that there were a total of 100 steps on the staircase. Three of you, follow the square, climb the stairs, and enter the palace. There will be people there to receive you. After the maid bowed politely, she left. Looks like there are a lot of people here to give gifts. Zhuan smiled and looked at the square in front of him. He realized that there were many figures walking towards the palace at the end of the square. Among them, there was no lack of extremely powerful experts. Clearly, the space-time quicksand river was quite attractive to most cultivators. After passing through the square, the three of them entered the palace and were led into a private room by a boy. The private room wasn't big. The curtains in front were half closed, and one could see a rather large circular platform outside. Around the circular platform, there were many similar private rooms. Around the circular platform, there was a hazy light barrier, making it impossible to see what was in the center of the circular platform. Lord Quangli is on the platform. You can rest in the private room for a while. After Lord Quangli gives the order, you can enter the platform. However, before Lord Quangli gives the order, you can't act recklessly. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. After the boy finished speaking, he left the private room. This Quangli is really something. We've already entered, and this guy still wants us to wait. Zhuan frowned and said coldly, Brother Zhua, little brother Zhua, Lord Quangli has always been like this. His personality is very unpredictable, and he is also extremely arrogant. As long as you get used to it, it'll be fine. Chao Feng said helplessly. Zhuan nodded and didn't say anything. Instead, he sat on a soft seat and leaned back to rest with his eyes closed. 6 hours later, the surrounding private rooms began to become noisy. Zhuan also slowly opened his eyes and cast his gaze towards the circular platform in the center. The light barrier around the circular platform began to dim, revealing a circular platform. However, there was no one on the platform, and there was no figure of Quangli. Instead, there was a platform that was half the height of a person. After the light barrier on the surface of the circular platform dissipated, a young and beautiful woman walked up from below the platform. The woman came to the front of the platform with a warm smile on her face. She smiled at the surrounding people and said, Hello, fellow Taoists. I am Dancer, a disciple of Lord Quangli. Although Master has come out of seclusion, he is still studying the matter of refining, so he didn't come out. This platform is a two-way teleportation array. However, it can only teleport items. Everyone can place the items you want to give today on this platform. If Master is satisfied, he will inform me. Otherwise, it means that he is not satisfied. After the young woman finished speaking, there wasn't much noise in the surroundings. Obviously, everyone knew the rules here. I wonder who wants to come up first. Dancer's beautiful eyes slightly raised as she said lightly. After Dancer's words, a middle-aged man suddenly walked out of one of the private rooms. The middle-aged man came to the platform, then immediately took out a brocade box from his spirit ring and handed it to Dancer, saying, I am Yu Wu of Laoshan Star River. I hope Lord Quangli can accept this small gift. Dancer nodded, took the brocade box, and put it on the platform that was half the height of a person. Suddenly, the platform lit up with a white light, and the brocade box disappeared from the platform. Apparently, it was teleported into the hands of the so-called Quangli. In the private room, Zhuan glanced at the middle-aged man. The moment the middle-aged man took out the brocade box, Zhuan quietly probed it with his divine sense and found that the brocade box contained flowing flame crystals. Flowing flame crystal stones were an extremely precious starry sky artifact crafting material. Even Zhuan did not have one. According to the estimated value, this flowing flame crystal stone was equivalent to a grade 7 spirit medicine and was a very precious artifact crafting material. In Zhuan's view, since this person could take out flowing flame crystals, he should be qualified to enter the space-time quicksand river. Master has replied, "Your gift is okay, but it's not good enough. Please go back." After a while, Dancer finally spoke. When she said this, the middle-aged man's eyes dimmed. He cupped his fists and left the platform. Chapter 2291. Sword Heart Stone, Brother Zhua, Master Kuang Li will never take out the gifts he received. After all, this is his territory, so no one dares to mess around. Chao Feng seemed to have noticed the strange look on Zhuo Wen's face and couldn't help but whisper. Zhuo Wen nodded. He naturally understood what Chao Feng meant. The Quicksand family was the most powerful force in the old Orchid Star River, and Kuang Li was the strongest person in the entire old Orchid Star River. In the lair of the Quicksand family, no one dared to mess around, and no one dared to contradict Kuang Li in any way. After the middle-aged man left, many cultivators came out of their private rooms one after another. They took out the things they had prepared and handed them to the dancers. Unfortunately, none of them passed, and these cultivators naturally didn't take back their gifts. Instead, they were ordered to leave by the dancers. "I'll go first. You two wait for me here." Within the private room, Zhuan stood up and said something to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan before leaving the private room and heading towards the circular platform. At the same time, 3 other cultivators also arrived at the circular platform and lined up in front of Zhuan. Zhuan didn't care and waited silently in the 4th place. Coincidentally, the person in front of Zhuan was the azure-robed woman he had met at the entrance. The azure-robed woman obviously recognized Zhuan and smiled at Zhuan. Zhuan noticed that the azure-robed woman was also holding a brocade box in her hand, but the azure-robed woman's hands were tightly clenched and the back of her hands were a little pale. She was obviously very nervous. Zhuowen's divine sense inadvertently swept around and found that the azure-robed woman's brocade box was actually a pitch-black rock. Moreover, the shape of this pitch-black rock was like a palm-sized sword. However, the moment Zhuowen saw this pitch-black rock, his eyes suddenly narrowed, and then he revealed a look of pleasant surprise. This was because Zhuowen recognized this pitch-black rock. It was a top-grade refining material called Sword Heart Stone. The Sword Heart Stone had an unimaginable compatibility with sword-shaped god artifacts. In other words, if the Sword Heart Stone was added to a sword-shaped god artifact, it would increase its intelligence out of nowhere, causing the power of the sword to multiply. If it was lucky, its power might increase by a lot. Zhuowen himself was a sword user. However, his glorious Purple Star River Divine Sword had already been damaged. Even his more than 9,000 ancient swords had also been destroyed. The only divine sword he still had was the King's Sword. However, the King's Sword's level was a bit low. It was not suitable for the current Zhuowen, so he rarely used the King's Sword. However, if he had the Sword Heart Stone, Zhuowen was confident that he could upgrade the quality of the Emperor's Sword to the level of a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact. Moreover, because of the extremely high compatibility between the Sword Heart Stone and the Divine Sword, Zhuowen did not need any refining techniques. He only needed to provide a powerful flame to completely integrate the Sword Heart Stone into the Divine Sword. Thinking of this, Zhuowen quickly sent a sound transmission to the azure-robed woman and said, "This young lady, may I ask if you can exchange the Sword Heart Stone in your hand with me?" The azure-robed woman, who was originally waiting nervously, was shocked the moment she heard Zhuowen's sound transmission. She turned her head and stared straight at Zhuowen. The brocade box was arranged with a shielding restriction. Ordinary cultivators could not explore the brocade box with their spiritual consciousness. However, The white-robed youth behind her actually knew that the brocade box in her hand contained the sword heartstone. Did this guy know in advance? But soon, this idea was rejected by the azure-robed woman. After all, this white-robed youth did not know where her private room was, and she had never exposed the sword heartstone in front of this youth. Then the only possibility was that the young man behind her had an extremely powerful divine sense. He had probed the contents of her brocade box without her noticing at all. If her guess was true, then this white-robed youth in front of her was really terrifying. I can exchange it with a heaven immortal pill and a top-grade starry sky spirit vein. Zhuowen could not help but ask. Zhuowen saw through the azure-robed woman's cultivation at a glance. She was at the peak of the 5th-step void sky, only 1 step away from the 6th-step void sky and the unity of heaven realm. As long as she had a heaven immortal pill, this woman could basically break through smoothly. What? You have a heaven immortal pill? The azure-robed woman's beautiful eyes shook, and she finally sent a sound transmission to Zhuowen. The azure-robed woman came to the quicksand family this time to enter the space-time quicksand river to advance to the 6th-step void sky. She had been at the peak of the 5th-step void sky for a long time, but she had always been lacking. She knew that if she did not have a fortuitous encounter, she would not be able to advance to the 6th-step void sky. She had also heard of the heaven immortal pill, but it was extremely rare and only the major forces had it. Moreover, it cannot be bought with money. She heard that there were many treasures inside the space-time quicksand river and wanted to have a fortuitous encounter inside. If it were not for advancement, the azure-robed woman would not have taken the risk to enter the space-time quicksand river. If you have a heaven immortal pill, I will trade with you. The azure-robed woman quickly replied. Zhuowen sighed in his heart. He was afraid that the azure-robed woman would not agree. At that time, if he gave the sword heartstone to Kuang Li, he would definitely not be able to get it back. It was simply a waste of God's gift. Next, suddenly, the dancer said loudly, looking at the azure-robed woman. Obviously, she was hinting the azure-robed woman to give the gift. The azure-robed woman planned to trade with Zhuowen, so she naturally could not give away the sword heartstone. Instead, she took out a new brocade box from her spirit ring and placed it on the high platform. This time, the azure-robed woman took out a brocade box that only contained ordinary materials. It was basically impossible for Kuang Li to take a fancy to it. She no longer planned to enter the space-time quicksand river. Her purpose in entering the space-time quicksand river was to find an opportunity to advance to the 6th-step void sky. But now that she had the opportunity to do so, she naturally did not plan to enter the dangerous space-time quicksand river. After the brocade box was sent out, the dancer standing next to the high platform suddenly smiled at the azure-robed woman and said, "Congratulations, Master feels that your gift is very much to his taste. You have passed and are qualified to enter the space-time quicksand river." The green-robed woman was stunned. She didn't expect that an unintentional gift would actually succeed. She didn't expect that a random gift would actually pass. This was really something she didn't expect. Zhuowen, who was standing behind the azure-robed woman, eyes flashed, but he did not say anything. Next, the dancer didn't pay any more attention to the dazed woman in green. Her gaze had already landed on Zhuowen. Zhuowen came to the front of the high platform, pondered for a while, and then took out a jade bottle from his spirit ring. This jade bottle contained 10 drops of heavenly domain starry sky essence. He knew that this thing was extremely precious. He did not believe that Kuang Li would not be interested. Chapter 2292. Zhu Ruizhuan nodded and immediately returned to the private room under the guidance of a maid. However, before leaving, Zhuowen exchanged contact information with the green-robed woman. Returning to the private room, Zhuowen greeted Chao Feng and Chao Huan before contacting the green-robed woman. Then, under the guidance of the green-robed woman, he walked towards the green-robed woman's private room. The green-robed woman's name was Zhu Rui. She did not reveal her identity to Zhuowen, and Zhuowen would not ask about her private matters. After all, the two of them only had a transactional relationship. "Brother Zhua, please have a seat." After entering Zhu Rui's private room, Zhu Rui warmly invited Zhuan to sit down and immediately smiled. Brother Zhua, is what you said just now true? Zhuan smiled slightly and said, Of course it's true. As he spoke, Zhuan took out a sparkling and translucent pill and handed it to Zhu Rui. Heavenly Demon Island's old ancestor, Magatama, gave Zhuan 5 heaven immortal pills. Although Zhuan used all of them, after he destroyed High Heaven Sect, Clear Void Peak, and other powerful sects, he naturally swept up a lot of resources. Although Heaven Immortal pills were precious to powerful sects like High Heaven Sect and Heaven and Earth Sect, they were not too rare. Therefore, Zhuan had a lot of Heaven Immortal pills on him. Zhu Rui took the Heaven Immortal pills and examined them. Finding nothing unusual, her pretty face immediately revealed a look of ecstasy. Sister Zhu Rui, I promised you that I would also give you a starry sky divine vein. Take this. Zhuan smiled slightly and took out a starry sky divine vein and handed it to Zhu Rui. Although the starry sky divine vein was very large, Zhuan deliberately shrunk this starry sky divine vein to about 10 meters in size. Zhu Rui took the starry sky divine vein, and the shock in her beautiful eyes became even more intense. She could see that this starry sky divine vein was definitely a top-grade starry sky divine vein. Its preciousness was not inferior to the Heaven Immortal pills, perhaps even higher. Before, Zhu Rui's attention was all on the Heaven Immortal pills, so she did not pay much attention to the starry sky divine vein that Zhuan mentioned. Only now did she realize how sincere this white-robed young man in front of her was. Brother Zhua, your gift is... Zhu's Jade's hands trembled slightly, and she looked a little embarrassed. Zhuan smiled faintly and said, Compared to the Sword Heart Stone, it's worth more to me. Zhu Rui's starry sky divine vein was Zhu Rui's immortal pills, Zhu Rui's immortal pills of course. What Zhu Rui did not know was that the Sword Heart Stone was far more useful to Zhuan than to her. This was also the reason why Zhuan was willing to trade the starry sky divine vein and the Heaven Immortal pills. Brother Zhua, this is the Sword Heart Stone. Take it. After Zhu Rui confirmed the Heaven Immortal pills and the starry sky divine vein, she simply handed the Sword Heart Stone to Zhuan. Zhuan looked at the sword-shaped stone in his hand and felt the sharp aura contained in the stone. He could not help but smile. Brother Zhua, this time you and I are qualified to enter the space-time quicksand river. Why don't you go in with me? Zhu Rui suddenly said. Zhuan was taken aback. He hesitated. His main goal in entering the river of space-time quicksand was the space-time key. He could not possibly bring Zhu Rui to search for the space-time key, so he subconsciously wanted to refuse. If Brother Zhua has any inconvenience, then forget it. Zhu Rui's ability to read people's expressions was not weak. She could see Zhuan's scruples and could not help but whisper. Zhuan cupped his fists and said apologetically, Miss Zhu, I'm really sorry. This Zhua has entered the space-time quicksand river to do something very important. How about this? After entering the space-time quicksand river, this Zhua will find you after finishing his business. Zhu Rui's beautiful eyes showed disappointment. She knew very well that it was easy to get lost in the space-time quicksand river. Zhuan's words were just polite to her, so she did not take it to heart. Zhu Rui smiled and said, Brother Zhua is too polite. If we can meet in the space-time quicksand river, that would be the best. Zhuan cupped his fists again and chatted with Zhu Rui for a while before leaving Zhu Rui's private room. This time, Zhuan was not joking. He had comprehended a trace of the power of space-time. After entering the space-time quicksand river, Zhuan believed that as long as he was given time, he should be able to comprehend a part of the space-time law. At the very least, he would not get lost in the space-time quicksand river. If he was really fated to meet Zhu Rui in the space-time quicksand river, then he would not mind helping her. After Zhuan left, the door to Zhu Rui's private room was opened again, and a graceful figure slowly walked in. This was a very young man, but this man gave off a very beautiful feeling. The elegant man in front of him had snow-white skin, red lips, and white teeth. His eyes were long and narrow, and they were actually phoenix eyes. If this man didn't have an Adam's apple, others would definitely think that this man was a woman in disguise. This beautiful man walked to the opposite side of Zhu Rui and sat down very elegantly. He looked at Zhu Rui in front of him and said with a smile, "Zhu and your sister Zhu, who was that strange man just now? Could it be that he's your little lover?" Zhu Rui looked at the beautiful man in front of her, and her cheeks suddenly turned red. She quickly said, "Senior brother Yao misunderstood. Brother Zhua and I are only in a business relationship. He is not my little lover." The beautiful man looked at the embarrassed Zhu Rui with some amusement and said, "But why did I hear that you were planning to enter the space-time quicksand river with that guy? What? Am I not happy to go with you?" Zhu Rui said with a bitter face, "If I knew that senior brother would also come, I would not have invited brother Zhua. Moreover, with senior brother, I will be much safer entering the space-time quicksand river." Speaking up to here, Zhu Rui smiled and stepped forward to hold the beautiful man's right arm as if she was acting coquettishly. Actually, I was just worried about you coming out. If you wanted to advance to the 6 steps void sky, you should have told me. The Empyrean God pill is not something precious. I could have just given you one. Why did you have to come all the way to the Gulen Star River to enter the space-time quicksand river? The space-time quicksand river is not a good place. The beautiful man shook his head and looked at Zhu Rui in front of him speechlessly. Zhu Rui, however, said sadly, "Senior brother, I am not you. My aptitude is too poor. Even Master doesn't like me and has even reduced my cultivation resources. If this continues, it will take forever to advance to the 6 steps void sky." AI, Martial Ant is indeed a bit harsh. The beautiful man coughed dryly, but found that he did not know how to continue this topic. In any case, senior brother is here. Although that Zhua is not bad, he is only at the 6 steps void sky. Compared to senior brother, the gap is not small. If I enter the space-time quicksand river with you, my safety is completely guaranteed. Chapter 2293. Meeting Ma Yujie again, the beautiful man said in a rare, serious tone, "Junior sister, the Zhuan you mentioned should be the one who made the deal with you, right? If you're talking about him, then I'm afraid you've misjudged him. Although his cultivation is only at the peak of the 6-step void sky stage, he gives off a very dangerous aura. This person is definitely not an ordinary cultivator." Zhu Rui's beautiful eyes narrowed when she heard this. Although she didn't have much contact with this senior brother in front of her, she knew how powerful this senior brother was. A mere 6-step void sky stage cultivator couldn't possibly enter her senior brother's eyes. However, Zhuowen was able to make her senior brother so cautious. It could be seen that this Zhuowen was indeed not simple. However, Zhu Rui didn't particularly care. No matter how powerful this Zhuowen was, it was impossible for him to be more powerful than her senior brother. One had to know that her senior brother was the head disciple of the most powerful force in the 6 Desires heavenly domain. His name was well known in the 6 Desires heavenly domain. However, this senior brother of hers was relatively low-key. When traveling in the outside world, he wouldn't reveal his real name. After Zhuowen returned to the private room, he found that there was an unexpected guest in the private room. In the center of the private room, a table had appeared at some unknown time. The table was filled with delicacies, and a fat fatty was sitting at the table, eating those delicacies without a care for his image. Chao Feng and Chao Zhuan stood to the side, looking at the fatty who was eating heartily with fear in their eyes. Zhuowen's return naturally attracted the attention of the 3 people. When Chao Feng and Chao Zhuan saw that Zhuowen had returned, they both sighed and immediately moved to Zhuowen's side. On the other hand, the damned fatty only casually glanced at Zhuowen and waved his hand at Zhuowen in a very old-fashioned manner. "Brother Zhua, what a coincidence to be able to meet you in the quicksand family. Come, let's eat together." Zhuowen's gaze was extremely calm. He said indifferently, "Brother Ma, it's indeed a coincidence. Did you come to the quicksand family for the space-time quicksand river? Although Zhuowen looked calm on the surface, he was secretly vigilant in his heart. This damn fatty was not simple. Zhuowen made up his mind to stay as far away from this damn fatty as possible. Otherwise, he would be tricked by this guy sooner or later. Yeah, from the looks of it, Brother Zhua should also be here for the space-time quicksand river. It is said that the time-space quicksand river contains extremely powerful space-time laws. Normally, space-time laws are not easy to form. They require specific factors. Perhaps the time-space divine key is in the time-space quicksand river. Ma Yujia said casually as he ate heartily. At the same time, this damn fatty's gaze was fixed on Zhuowen, as if he was paying attention to Zhuowen's reaction. Unfortunately, Zhuowen's expression remained calm from beginning to end. This made Ma Yujia quite puzzled. After all, when Zhuowen wanted to separate from him, he already had some doubts in his heart. When he arrived at the Gulen Galaxy and inquired about the time-space quicksand river, the doubts in his heart grew even stronger. He felt that Zhuowen must know something about the time-space quicksand river. Perhaps it had something to do with the time-space divine key. Of course, all of this was Ma Yujia's own guess. As for whether Zhuowen knew the inside story, Ma Yujia wasn't particularly clear. Or rather, he didn't know anything at all. Zhuowen nodded and said in agreement, Brother Ma is right. Maybe there really is a time-space divine key in the time-space quicksand river. Maybe if I'm lucky, I might be able to obtain a second time-space divine key. Ma Yujia glanced at Zhuowen again and felt a little puzzled. Obviously, Zhuowen's reaction was not what he wanted to see. Could it be that this Zhuowen really knew nothing about the time-space quicksand river, just like him? I can see that Brother Ma is very strong, and the time-space quicksand river is not a good place. How about this? Brother Ma will enter the time-space quicksand river with me. If you and I join forces, we will definitely be like fish in water in the time-space quicksand river. What do you think, Brother Ma? Zhuowen smiled and extended an invitation. Ma Yujia was even more puzzled in his heart, but he still smiled and said, Brother Zhuo must be joking. This Ma is just a small fry. It's not worth mentioning. If I follow Brother Zhuo when the time comes, I'm afraid I will only drag you down. So forget it. Zhuowen sneered in his heart and breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that he had the upper hand in this conversation. If Zhuowen did not invite Ma Yujia and instead proposed to enter the river of time and space quicksand alone, it would definitely arouse the fatty's suspicions. At that time, with the fatty's personality, he would definitely pester Zhuowen. This would completely destroy Zhuowen's plan. Now that Zhuowen was playing hard to get, the fatty couldn't make up his mind. Moreover, the fatty definitely didn't trust Zhuowen. Since Zhuowen didn't have anything good on him, the fatty naturally wouldn't follow Zhuowen. After all, there wasn't anything good to be gained. What a pity! With Brother Ma's talent and strength, if you and I join forces, we can even take down the entire time-space quicksand river. Are you really unwilling to join forces with me? Zhuowen shook his head and sighed. It was as if his parents had died. The corner of Ma Yujia's mouth twitched. He smiled and said, Brother Zhuo, you think too highly of me. This Ma is just a nobody. If Brother Zhuo doesn't have anything else, this Ma will take his leave first. If we are fated to enter the time-space quicksand river this time, we might be able to meet again in it. With that, Ma Yujia didn't wait for Zhuowen to continue speaking. He put away the table and left the private room. Brother Zhuo, who is this person? He is very strong. After Ma Yujia left, Chao Feng came to Zhuowen with a serious look. When Ma Yujia had barged in just now, he had tried to stop him. Unfortunately, Ma Yujia had completely suppressed him by releasing a little bit of his aura. How could Chao Feng not know that Ma Yujia's strength far surpassed his? Of course, Zhuowen could confront the fat man, and the fat man was quite afraid of him. Zhuowen could see that the white-clothed young man in front of him was not weaker than the fat man. You don't have to worry about this person. This time, I thank Brother Chao for bringing me to the Quicksand family. This is a gift of gratitude. Take it. Zhuowen took out 3 drops of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence and handed it to Chao Feng. The latter wanted to refuse, But when he found out that it was Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence, his whole body trembled. His hands trembled, and he almost knelt down. This is... Chow Feng suddenly looked at Zhuo, his face flushed red. This was because he was too excited. Yes, there are 3 drops of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence. This thing is useful to you, so you don't have to refuse it, Zhuo said with a smile. Chow Feng deeply bowed toward Zhuo and said, Brother Zhuo, Chow Feng will never forget your great kindness. If Brother Zhuo needs me in the future, I, Chow Feng, will do anything for you, even if it is a mountain of blades or a sea of flames. Chapter 2294. Wild gravel on the circular platform. After the last cultivator left in dejection, the gift-giving ceremony could be considered to have come to an end. The dancer waved her sleeve, and the platform at the center of the platform shrank into the ground. There are a total of 13 people who are qualified to enter the river of space-time quicksand, she said loudly. I've already instructed my subordinates to issue you all qualification tokens. With these tokens, you can enter the river of space-time quicksand at any time. Of course, you only have one chance, but there's no time limit. If there's nothing else, you can leave now. After saying this, the dancer was about to leave, but a voice called out to her. The dancer looked at the private room Zhuo was in and said coldly, May I know what this guest wants? Zhuo walked out of the private room and returned to the platform. He cupped his fists and said, Miss Dancer, I'm Zhuo, and I want to ask Master Wild Gravel to refine a god tool for me. Please help me notify him. As soon as he said this, the dancer's face immediately turned cold. Meanwhile, Zhu Rue and the beautiful man, who were still sitting in the private room, revealed strange expressions. This guy's quite bold. He directly asked Master Wild Gravel to refine a god tool. That's breaking the rules, the beautiful man said in amusement. However, Zhu Rue revealed a worried expression and said, Brother Zhuo is too impulsive. He's going to suffer a little. Who do you think you are? You want me to notify Master and ask him to refine a god tool for you? What right do you have? Get the hell out of here right now, or don't blame me for being rude, the dancer said coldly. Zhuo's face instantly darkened. This dancer really wasn't polite at all. She directly told him to get the hell out of here. Miss Dancer, you just need to notify Master Wild Gravel for me. Zhuo was about to say something, but his words were immediately interrupted. He heard the sound of something piercing through the air and rushing toward him. The dancer's slender hand suddenly blasted out, and terrifying divine power transformed into a raging storm that swept toward Zhuo. Zhuo's face darkened. He didn't expect the dancer to attack him without giving him any face. Zhuo coldly snorted. With a wave of his sleeve, the divine power storm that was rushing over suddenly collapsed when it was a few meters away from Zhuo. The dancer's expression changed slightly. She originally thought that this white-robed youth was just an ordinary Void Sky 6 stage cultivator, so she didn't take him seriously. Now that this kid had easily dispersed her divine power storm, the dancer was bewildered. Miss Dancer, I didn't come here today to make trouble. I hope Miss Dancer can help me inform Master Quangli. Zhuo Wen's eyes were cold. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said calmly. The dancer sneered and said, I've said it before. Who do you think you are? You don't have the qualifications to meet Master. After saying that, the dancer whistled. Immediately, 3 figures rushed out from the bottom of the platform and rushed toward Zhuo at an extremely fast speed. Looking carefully, the auras of these 3 figures were very powerful. They were all Void Sky 7 stage experts. When the other cultivators in the surrounding private rooms saw this scene, they all sighed in their hearts that Zhuo was going to be unlucky. Bang! 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 Unfortunately, when the 3 figures were 10 meters away from Zhuo, 3 consecutive explosions suddenly sounded. Then, the 3 figures groaned and smashed into the ground below the platform in an extremely sorry state. For a moment, the cultivators in the surrounding private rooms fell into silence. They looked at the white-robed youth who was still standing on the platform in disbelief. Senior brother, you're right. This Zhuowen is really not simple. In the private room, Zhu Rue looked at the scene on the platform with surprise in her beautiful eyes. At first, when the beautiful man said that Zhuowen was not simple, she didn't care too much. Now that Zhuowen had taken down 3 Void Sky 7-stage cultivators with just one move, Zhu Rue finally understood the beautiful man's words. The beautiful man didn't feel the slightest bit surprised. Instead, he looked at Zhuowen and said, "This guy hid very well." The dancer's beautiful eyes shrank. She said coldly, "How dare you injure the people of my quicksand family? Do you want to die?" Zhuowen didn't bother to pay attention to the dancer. Instead, he walked forward step by step and said indifferently, "Miss Dancer, I'm just defending myself. I just want you to inform Master Kuang Lu. If he doesn't agree, I'll leave immediately." The dancer took a few steps back and took out a jade talisman. She said coldly, "You're simply courting death. As long as I crush the jade talisman in my hand, a group of experts from the quicksand family will emerge to kill you. You're dead." "Oh, then crush the jade talisman now." Zhuowen stopped and looked at the dancer coldly. The dancer felt that something was wrong, but she still crushed the jade talisman. Unfortunately, the signal transmitted by the jade talisman was blocked by a light barrier around them. "Shielding array formation? When did you set it up?" The dancer's beautiful eyes shrank. She immediately realized that the light barrier was actually a shielding array formation. The signal she sent out just now had been blocked. Zhuowen just looked at the dancer quietly. Killing intent began to appear in his eyes. The dancer naturally saw the killing intent in Zhuowen's eyes. This killing intent was extremely strong. It was as if this person would kill her in the next moment. "Wait, I'll help you inform Master." Seeing Zhuowen approaching step by step, the dancer's forehead was covered in cold sweat. She hurriedly said. Zhuowen stopped and looked at the dancer with a smile. The latter's face was ugly. She slowly came to the center of the platform and immediately began to communicate with Kuang Li. After a while, the dancer looked at Zhuowen with a slightly strange gaze and said, "Master said he can see you, but he wants to see how sincere you are." The corners of Zhuowen's mouth curled into a smile. Previously, when he had sent the Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence to Kuang Li, he knew that Kuang Li would definitely meet him. Although he only gave Zhuowen 3 drops of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence, this kind of thing was something that could only be encountered by chance. Kuang Li would definitely think that Zhuowen had more Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence on him. Now that Zhuowen had a favor to ask of Kuang Li, he didn't believe that Kuang Li didn't want to see him. "Of course there is sincerity, but I need to see Master Kuang Li first," Zhuowen said indifferently. The dancer nodded and did not refute Zhuowen. Instead, she said in a deep voice, "Come with me. Master is waiting for you in the depths of the cave." After saying that, the dancer led the way, while Zhuowen quietly followed behind her. Other than Zhuowen, the rest of the cultivators in the private room were led out of the quicksand family by the subordinates arranged by the dancer. The place where Kuang Li was in seclusion was a stone house in the deepest part of the cave. This stone house was ordinary, and it even looked like a house where the people of a primitive tribe lived. Chapter 2295. Fusion Dao Fruit. "Master, I've brought him here." The arrogance on the dancer's face had completely vanished as she respectfully bowed to the stone house. "This little brother, come in. You can leave first." An unquestionable voice came from the stone house. The dancer nodded, glanced at Zhuowen by her side, and then left silently. Zhuowen pondered for a moment before stepping into the stone house. The moment he entered the stone house, Zhuowen felt a terrifying heat wave hit him in the face. The temperature inside had reached a terrifying level. Even Zhuowen felt his body burning. In the center of the stone house, there was a huge furnace. In front of the furnace was a forging table. At this moment, there was a burly figure on the forging table. His left hand was holding a long sword that was red hot from the fire. His left hand was swinging a huge hammer that was half a man's height. He was constantly hammering the long sword, causing sparks to fly. It was a spectacular sight. Zhuo knew that the burly figure in front of him should be Kuang Li. Kuang Li looked to be about 35 years old. His muscles were bulging, and he was 9 feet tall. At this moment, his upper body was bare. He looked as strong as an iron tower. Zhuo silently watched Kuang Li forge the divine sword. He did not disturb him. About 6 hours later, Kuang Li suddenly threw the divine sword into the air with his left hand. He then took out a porcelain bottle from his spirit ring and sprinkled the azure water inside the bottle. The moment the azure water sprayed out, it turned into a blue anaconda and wrapped around the divine sword in the air. Sizzle, sizzle. After the azure water completely wrapped around the divine sword, the terrifying heat on the surface of the divine sword was quickly reduced. The appearance of the divine sword was completely revealed. Void Sky Divine Artifact. Zhuo narrowed his eyes as he looked at the completed Void Sky Divine Artifact in astonishment. He could tell that this divine sword was a high-quality Void Sky Divine Artifact. After Kuang Li put away the divine sword, he casually placed it to the side. His gaze fell on Zhuo as he said with a smile, "Little brother, how should I address you?" Zhuo smiled faintly. Kuang Li nodded. Stroking the stubble on his chin with his right hand, he asked, "Were you the one who gave me those 3 drops of Heavenly Domain Star Essence?" "That's right," Zhuo replied concisely. To be able to obtain the Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence at such a young age, it seems that your luck is not small. You should have more than 3 drops of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence on you, right? Wild Gravel chuckled. Zhuo also smiled and said, "Just as Grandmaster guessed, if Grandmaster can help me refine tools, I'm willing to take out 3 more drops of Heavenly Domain Star Essence. After all, I don't have much Heavenly Domain Star Essence left." Kuang Li's eyes flickered. He stretched out his right hand and said, "3 drops is too little. 5 drops. Zhuo immediately showed a hesitant look. He said awkwardly, "Master Kuang Li, if you give me 5 drops, I really don't have any Heavenly Domain Star Essence." Kuang Li said indifferently, "If you don't have 5 drops, I won't help you refine tools." Zhuo sneered in his heart. He knew that Kuang Li was a greedy guy. He could only pretend to be pained and said, "If Grandmaster can help me refine tools, 5 drops it is. Haha, straightforward. I won't take advantage of you. First, let me see what kind of divine tool you want to refine. When I'm done, I'll take your reward," Kuang Li said with a smile. Zhuo nodded. He took out the phagocytosis and handed it to Kuang Li. After Kuang Li took the phagocytosis, his eyes suddenly became much more cautious. He frowned slightly. After sizing it up for a while, he said, "This treasure of yours is very strange. If I'm not wrong, there are more than 9,000 seals in it." Zhuo nodded. He secretly praised Kuang Li in his heart. He really deserved his reputation. At a glance, he could see that there were more than 9,000 seals in the phagocytosis. "You want me to help you break all the seals in it? I think you found the wrong person. I'm just a tool refiner, not a powerful divine array master. I can't break these seals." Kuang Li's face was a little ugly. He felt that Zhuo was playing with him. Zhuo shook his head and said, "Junior doesn't want Senior to break the seals. I need you to help me integrate this thing into the phagocytosis." After saying that, Zhuo took out a Dao fruit. The moment Kuang Li saw the Dao fruit, he stood up with a whoosh. He looked at the Dao fruit in Zhuo's hand in disbelief and said, Isn't this a Dao fruit?" Zhuo nodded slightly and said, "This is indeed a Dao fruit. I hope Grandmaster can help me integrate this Dao fruit into the phagocytosis." Kuang Li gradually calmed down. He took a deep look at Zhuo. He discovered that this young man in front of him was not an ordinary rich man. Not only did he have a rare treasure like the Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence, but he also had a rare treasure like the Dao fruit. It could be said that the Dao fruit and the Heavenly Starry Sky Essence that Zhuo took out were treasures that most forces in the 6 Desires heavenly realm coveted. Kuang Li sighed softly and said, "It's not too difficult for me to integrate the Dao fruit into your phagocytosis. But do you only have this one Dao fruit?" Zhuo looked calm and nodded. "Yes, I only have this one." I obtained this Tao fruit by accident. It's a great fortune to be able to obtain this kind of thing. Li nodded and agreed with what Zhuan said. The Tao fruit was much more precious than the heavenly starry sky essence. It was already a heaven-defying opportunity for this young man to obtain one. Little brother, you go out first. It will take some time to integrate the Tao fruit into your phagocytosis. During this time, don't disturb me, Li said in a deep voice. Zhuan sneered and said, Master Li, it's not that I don't trust you, but this Tao fruit and the phagocytosis are very important to me. I have to see it myself. Moreover, it's just integrating the Tao fruit into the phagocytosis. It's not difficult for you. It should be done soon. Are you doubting me? Li looked at Zhuan with an unfriendly gaze. It's not a doubt, but it's a matter of great importance. I have to be careful. If Master doesn't think it's possible, then I don't plan to refine it, Zhuan said lightly. Master Li frowned slightly. This was the first time he tried to integrate the Tao fruit into a divine artifact. It was also a rare attempt. Master Li knew very well that this attempt would greatly improve his refining skills, so he didn't want to let go of this opportunity. In that case, you can watch from the side, but you can't disturb me. Otherwise, you can't blame me if I fail. Li snorted coldly. Master, don't worry. This Zhuan will definitely keep quiet. Zhuan nodded in agreement. Seeing Zhuan so tactful, Li's expression became better. Then, he no longer paid attention to Zhuan and threw the phagocytosis into the furnace. Chapter 2296. Yao Xiangjuanjuan silently watched as Li fused the Tao fruit with the phagocytosis. He memorized Li's every move. Zhuan had a total of 4 Tao fruits. His original plan was to fuse all 4 with the phagocytosis, but he knew that if he exposed too much of such a precious treasure, it would be detrimental to him. Even though Zhuan had taken out 1 Tao fruit, Zhuan could see the greed in Grit's eyes. If Grit knew that Zhuan had 4 Tao fruits on him, this old man would probably tear off all pretense of cordiality and snatch them away. Zhuan wanted to watch Li's refining process with his own eyes because he wanted to learn all of Li's techniques. When the time came, he could try to fuse the Tao fruit with the phagocytosis. The flames burned the phagocytosis for 6 hours. Then Li squeezed his right hand, took out the phagocytosis, and suspended it 5 meters above his head. Then, Li took out the Tao fruit. His gaze suddenly turned serious. Wild Gravel took out a lot of materials from his spirit ring and burned them into liquid. Then the liquid instantly wrapped around the Tao fruit. The surface of the Tao fruit was extremely powerful. The moment the liquid touched the Tao fruit, a part of it was annihilated. However, Li had expected this. He used his surging divine power to suppress the Tao fruit, keeping the liquid on the surface of the Tao fruit in balance. Fuse. Li's gaze was extremely serious. With a low shout, he immediately brought the Tao fruit closer to the phagocytosis. When the phagocytosis and the Tao fruit finally touched, a crackling sound rang out. Then, the liquid on the Tao fruit surface began to fuse with the phagocytosis. Zhuan could clearly see the Tao fruit slowly enter the phagocytosis along with the liquid. It was as if the Tao fruit and the liquid had become one. Before long, the liquid completely fused with the phagocytosis. The Tao fruit also followed the liquid into the phagocytosis. Whoosh! The phagocytosis buzzed. A powerful Tao rhyme circulated on the phagocytosis's surface. Then the phagocytosis suddenly flew out and landed in Zhuan's hand. Zhuan's eyes shone as he looked at the phagocytosis in his hand. His heart was filled with excitement. He could feel that with this Tao rhyme, the phagocytosis's power definitely surpassed that of a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact. Now that you've added Tao fruits into your divine tool, I'm afraid its power has increased quite a bit. In my opinion, it should be superior to a secondary heaven-breaking divine tool, but it's still a bit weaker than a Tao-proving divine tool. Unless you can add even more Tao fruits into it, there's a chance that this thing can transform into a Tao-proving divine tool. Kuang Li looked at the devouring seal in Zhuo Wen's hand with satisfaction. Clearly, he was very satisfied with this refinement. Thank you, Master Kuang Li. Zhuo Wen cupped his fists. He deeply agreed with Kuang Li's words. A Dao Confirmation Divine Weapon was a divine weapon that was superior to sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts, but weaker than sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts. The essence of a Dao Confirmation Divine Weapon was actually sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts. The reason why it was much more powerful than sub-heaven-breaking divine artifacts was that it contained the Dao rhyme of the heavenly Dao. It was like a Dao Confirmation expert's essence might be void heaven 9 steps. However, because of the Dao Confirmation, a Dao Confirmation expert grasped a more powerful heavenly Dao power than a void heaven 9 steps cultivator. Therefore, a Dao Confirmation expert was far more powerful than a void heaven 9 steps cultivator. Master Kuang Li, here are 5 drops of heavenly domain star essence. Zhuo Wen took out a jade bottle and threw it to Kuang Li. Then, he cupped his fists and said, "If Master Kuang Li has nothing else to say, I will take my leave first." After receiving the jade bottle, Kuang Li casually played with it with his right hand and said with a smile, "Zhuo Xiaoyu, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Why don't you stay in my quicksand family as a guest? In any case, you have obtained the qualification to enter the space-time quicksand river. When the time comes, I will send someone to take you to the space-time quicksand river." Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Thank you for your kindness, Master Kuang Li. However, I have some urgent matters to attend to, so I will not be a guest." Kuang Li nodded and didn't urge him to stay. He just said regretfully, "Since Zhuo Xiaoyu has urgent matters to attend to, then forget it. If you have time next time, you can come to the quicksand family. This old man will definitely not neglect you." Zhuo Wen said a few polite words, then cupped his fists and left the stone house. However, after Zhuo Wen left the stone house, his eyes suddenly became gloomy. This was because he found that the moment Kuang Li handed over the phagocytosis to him, he left a divine sense imprint on him. After all, Kuang Li was a half-step, 9-step void sky expert. This kind of powerhouse was much stronger than a peak 8th-step void sky cultivator. Generally speaking, if such a powerhouse left a divine sense imprint on a 6th-step void sky cultivator, it was basically impossible to detect it. However, Zhuo Wen was different. His divine soul was too powerful, comparable to Kuang Li's. Therefore, the moment Kuang Li planted a divine sense imprint on him, Zhuo Wen immediately felt that something was wrong. It was just that Zhuo Wen didn't say anything. This Kuang Li should only think that he was just an ordinary 6-step void sky cultivator. However, Zhuo Wen, took out a Dao fruit and heavenly domain star essence. It would be strange if this old man didn't target him. After Zhuo Wen left, the smile on Kuang Li's face disappeared completely and was replaced by a cold light in his eyes. A mere 6-step void sky, and actually has so many good things. It seems that this child's opportunity is not small. However, this opportunity will soon change owners. Kuang Li sneered and muttered to himself. After leaving the quicksand family, Zhuo Wen met Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan at the door. It was obvious that the two had been waiting for a long time. In addition to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan, Zhuo Wen also found 2 uninvited guests. These 2 women were not unfamiliar to Zhuo Wen. Wasn't she Zhu Ruwei, who had made a deal with him at the quicksand family? Noticing Zhuo Wen's puzzled gaze, Zhu Ruwei greeted Zhuo Wen with a smile. Zhuo Wen also greeted her, but his gaze fell on the elegant man next to Zhu Ruwei. The main reason why Zhuo Wen noticed this man was that this man gave him a beautiful and breathtaking feeling. Even Zhu Ruwei, who was standing next to this man, felt overshadowed by him. If Zhuo Wen hadn't noticed the Adam's apple on this man's neck, he would have thought that this man was a woman dressed as a man. This Adam's apple proved that this guy was a real man. "Brother Zhuo, this is my senior brother, Yao Xiangjuan." Zhu Ruwei smiled at Zhuo Wen. Chapter 2297. 7 Profound Pill. "Brother Zhuo, can I have a word with you?" Yao Xiangjuan, who was as beautiful as a woman, coughed dryly and smiled at Zhuowen. Zhuowen nodded. Although he and Yao Xiangjuan had never met, he could see that Yao Xiangjuan had no malice towards him. Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan walked to the side. After Yao Xiangjuan set up a silencing restriction around them, he said to Zhuowen in a deep voice, "Brother Zhua, I'm here for your heavenly starry sky essence." Zhuowen's pupils shrank, and a murderous intent burst out from his eyes as he stared coldly at Yao Xiangjuan. At the same time, Zhuowen was even more puzzled. How did Yao Xiangjuan know that he had the heavenly starry sky essence? Brother Zhua, don't misunderstand. I was born with a pair of eyes that can see through restrictions, so the things that the cultivators of the quicksand family take out can't escape my eyes, and yours is the same, Yao Xiangjuan explained. Zhuowen let out a sigh of relief. It turned out that Yao Xiangjuan had such an ability. He thought that this guy was investigating him. I'm sorry, I've basically given all my heavenly starry sky essence to Master Kuangli to help me refine tools, so I don't have much left on me. After all, I also need this thing. Zhuowen cupped his hands and said. Yao Xiangjuan was not surprised by Zhuowen's refusal. He smiled and said, I only need one drop. Brother Zhua, don't worry, I won't let you take it out for free. This thing should be enough to exchange for a drop of heavenly starry sky essence. With that, Yao Xiangjuan took out a brocade box and handed it to Zhuowen. Zhuowen opened the brocade box and found that a pill with 7 golden lines on its surface was lying quietly in the brocade box. A strong medicinal aura burst out like the light of the rising sun, exceptionally dazzling. This is the 7 profound pill. Zhuowen's heart trembled as he stared fixedly at the pill with 7 golden veins in the brocade box. The 7 profound pill was a pill that could allow cultivators to reach the 7th level of the Void Sky realm. It was a pill that cultivators at the 6th level of the Void Sky realm desired the most. However, the value of the 7 Xiandan was even higher than the Sky Rank Dan. Even the Heavenly Devil Island didn't have many of them, let alone give them away. This Yao Xiangjuan did not hesitate to take out this 7 profound pill. It could be seen that this guy should also be a rich master. It was just that Zhuowen was surprised. This Yao Xiangjuan was so rich. Why didn't his junior sister Zhu Rui even have a single Empyrean Dan and still wanted to exchange with him? In fact, what Zhuowen didn't know was that Yao Xiangjuan's position in the sect was much higher than Zhu Rui's, and he was also deeply favored by his master, so he had a lot of good things on him. However, Zhu Rui's talent could only be considered average, so she was not valued by the sect. Naturally, she was embarrassed. I think it's not too much to exchange the 7 profound pill for a drop of Heavenly Domain's Starry Sky Essence, right? Yao Xiangjuan smiled slightly. Zhuowen closed the brocade box again, pondered for a moment, and nodded. It's not too much. This 7 profound pill is very useful to me. Here's a drop of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence. Take it. Saying so, Zhuowen simply took out a drop of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence and handed it to Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan carefully took out a jade bottle and stored the drop of Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence. Happy cooperation. Yao Xiangjuan showed a relaxed smile. He looked up and down at Zhuowen, and his eyes suddenly became dignified and serious. Brother Yao, what's wrong? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Yao Xiangjuan quickly said, Brother Zhua, someone has placed a divine sense imprint on you, and it's a very powerful person. If I'm not wrong, it might be Kuang Lu. Zhuowen pretended to be surprised and said, How is that possible? Why would Grandmaster Kuang Lu place a divine sense imprint on me? Maybe he has taken a fancy to your Heavenly Domain Starry Sky Essence or something else. You have to be extra careful. I can see this divine sense imprint, but I'm not qualified to expel it. As Yao Xiangjuan spoke up to hear, a trace of pity appeared in his eyes. Obviously, as far as he was concerned, Zhuowen being targeted by Kuang Li probably bode ill rather than well. Many thanks for Brother Yao's reminder. This Zhuo will pay attention. Zhuowen cupped his fists and immediately rushed to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan's side. After exchanging some pleasantries, he bid farewell to Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Rui and left. This Zhuan won't live for long. Yao Xiangjuan sighed softly. Zhu Rui's beautiful eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly asked, "Senior brother, what do you mean?" Yao Xiangjuan shook his head and said, "You don't have to worry about this. In short, this Zhuan has been targeted by Kuang Lu, and this boy is a rogue cultivator, so..." Zhu Rui fell into silence. Yao Xiangjuan was right. This Zhuan didn't have a weak background like they did. Kuang Lu was the most powerful cultivator in the Guilin Galaxy. Since this Zhuan had been targeted by such an expert, it was almost certain that he would die. "Brother Chao, Miss Chao, let's part ways here. I may have to stay in the Guilin Galaxy for a while." After flying for some distance, Zhuan suddenly cupped his fists and said to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. Since he had been targeted by Kuang Lu, it was naturally impossible for him to continue staying with Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. Otherwise, the two of them would be in too much danger. Therefore, now was the best time to part ways. Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan both revealed puzzled expressions. Obviously, Zhuan's farewell was too abrupt. However, after listening to Zhuan's explanation, the two of them didn't have much doubt. "Brother Zhua, little brother Zhua, this time, it was all thanks to you that we father and daughter were lucky enough to escape the Chao family and survive." Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan respectfully bowed to Zhuan. After saying a few words of farewell, they took out their flying ships and left. Watching Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan gradually disappear from his sight, Zhuan also turned around and left. He needed to find a place to cultivate in seclusion. Moreover, he also needed to prepare early. After all, he didn't know when Kuang Lu would come knocking on his door. Therefore, he needed to prepare early. Zhuan chose an inconspicuous meteorite in the northern part of the old Orchid Galaxy, near the Death Ice Field. Then he spent 3 days and 3 nights arranging dozens of grand arrays on this meteorite, such as entrapment and killing arrays and offensive arrays. Zhuan was now a Tier 8 God Array Master. Moreover, the Beast Bone Array Disc was much more powerful than ordinary array discs. Therefore, the arrays arranged by Zhuan were definitely Tier 8 arrays with terrifying power. Moreover, dozens of killing arrays were stacked together. If an ordinary Void Sky 8-step cultivator were to enter, they would definitely die. Even a peak Void Sky 8-step cultivator would be seriously injured. Kuang Lu was a half-step Void Sky 9-step cultivator who was even stronger than a peak Void Sky 8-step cultivator. Zhuan estimated that these killing arrays wouldn't be able to seriously injure Kuang Lu. However, they should be able to cause him a lot of trouble. Coupled with some of Zhuan's trump cards, he had a high chance of making Kuang Lu stay. After setting up the killing array, Zhuan then set up an extremely concealed shielding array outside of the dozens of great arrays. In addition, Zhuan also moved a lot of meteorites to cover the surroundings, completely concealing the place where he was cultivating in seclusion. Chapter 2298. Kong Kuangli. After doing all this, Zhuan entered the center of the array, intending to go into seclusion. He had already obtained the qualification token, so he could enter the spatial quicksand river at any time. However, Zhuan was not in a hurry. His harvest this time was not small. Not only did he obtain the Sword Heart Stone, he also obtained the 7 Profound Pill from Yao Xiangjuan. He planned to increase his strength first before entering the spatial quicksand river. This way, he would have a greater chance. On the praying mat, Zhuan flicked his finger and took out a sword-shaped stone. This was the Sword Heart Stone. At the same time, Zhuan took out the ancient King's Sword from the Spirit Ring. As soon as the King's Sword appeared, it let out a clear sword cry. Then, it swept to Zhuan's side and circled around Zhuan with a slightly wronged expression. "Haha, it's been hard on you, but I will need you soon. Now, I will increase your level," Zhuan said with a smile. The King's Sword seemed to understand Zhuan's words and let out a cheerful sword cry. It obediently floated in front of Zhuan. Zhuan took the Sword Heart Stone and placed it on the King's Sword's body. Then, he summoned the black-clothed Zhuan and spat out a mouthful of extreme flame. The terrifying extreme flame wrapped around the sword heart stone and the king's sword. The blazing high temperature was fusing the sword heart stone, causing the sword heart stone's energy to flow into the king's sword through the method of melting. Although the extreme flame was terrifying, the king's sword was also extraordinary. It was able to withstand the burning of the extreme flame. The extreme flame burned for 10 days and 10 nights, and Zhuowen also sat cross-legged for 10 days and 10 nights. On the morning of the 11th day, the sword heart stone finally completely fused into the two king's swords. Whoosh! A surge of aura suddenly burst out from the king's sword. Then it sprinkled out like rain. Under this aura, countless cracks appeared on the surrounding meteorites. Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the emperor's sword that had soared into the sky suddenly appeared in his hand. At this moment, Wang Jian's body was like a mirror. The simplicity of his body had faded a lot and was replaced by a sharp aura. It gave people a feeling that he had taken on a new look. Holding the king's sword in his hand, Zhuowen suddenly slashed out. Suddenly, the sword light swept out like raindrops and scattered in all directions. In an instant, Zhuowen performed the Tao Destruction sword art. He practiced the moves one by one, and his speed became faster and faster. Sword Dragon slashes the sky. When Zhuowen practiced the 8th move of the Tao Destruction sword technique, terrifying sword chi surged and condensed into a sharp, long dragon. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it swept forward explosively. Everywhere it passed, space exploded and the galaxy shook. At the moment of the 8th move, Zhuowen's sword momentum did not change. He actually used the 9th move of Destruction Sword Principle, Big Bang. When the sword was unleashed, the sky broke, the earth shattered, and the world collapsed. After the sword was unleashed, the death ice field in front of Zhuowen trembled violently. Then 1/3 of the ice field in the death ice field shattered into countless ice fragments. The death ice field was several times larger than the galaxy. 1/3 of the death ice field was equivalent to a galaxy. The sword was able to shatter 1/3 of the death ice field. It could be seen how terrifying the power of the sword was. Zhuowen kept his sword and stood there, his eyes filled with excitement. After adding the sword heart stone, the power of the king's sword had reached an unprecedented level. It was even stronger than the 2 secondary heaven-breaking divine weapons, Destroyer Meteor and 9 Extinction Divine Pattern Sword. Zhuowen knew that the sword heart stone had really given him a great deal. Suddenly, Zhuowen frowned. The monitoring formation that he had set up hundreds of millions of miles away was destroyed. Obviously, someone had broken into the area where he was cultivating in seclusion. Quangli, Zhuowen noticed that the spiritual consciousness imprint that was still on his body was also moving at this moment. The corners of his mouth revealed a cold smile. He immediately took off the spiritual consciousness imprint and planted it on the praying mat under his feet. After that, he quietly left this place. Quangli was not easy to deal with. Zhuowen had thought about it a lot in the past 10 days. He didn't want to face Quangli so early. After all, if he fought a half-step virtual sky expert like Jiu Deng head-on, he would at most win a Pyrrhic victory. It wouldn't do him any good. After he came out of the space-time quicksand river, he would find the quicksand family again. Of course, Zhuowen also knew that even if he didn't find the quicksand family would find him when the time came. Thinking of this, Zhuowen quietly left this place and rushed towards the space-time quicksand river. Not long after Zhuowen left, a figure quietly rushed to the periphery of the death ice field. It was a tall and muscular man. This person was Quangli of the quicksand family. At this moment, Quangli's gaze fell on the meteorite at the front. This meteorite was surrounded by 7 or 8 small meteorites. It was attached to the edge of the death ice field and looked extremely inconspicuous. It's been 10 days, but this boy still hasn't entered the space-time quicksand river. I'm afraid he's in seclusion here. Although I want to wait until this place enters the space-time quicksand river before dealing with this boy, it's fine now. The sooner I deal with him, the sooner I can be at ease. Quangli's eyes flashed. Without hesitation, he immediately rushed into the meteorite. He was a half-step virtual sky geodang expert, dealing with a mere virtual sky geodang ant. He really didn't need to sneak up on him. He could just directly crush him. However, the moment Quang Li entered the meteorite, he immediately found that something was wrong. There was no one inside the meteorite. His gaze fell on a futon in the middle of the meteorite. He sensed the spiritual sense imprint he had planted on this futon. Quang Li's pupil shrank. He knew he had been fooled. Just as he was about to leave, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. A terrifying killing intent swept over like a storm. Bastard. It's actually a killing array. This little bastard has already discovered my spiritual sense imprint. This little bastard actually schemed against me? Quang Lu roared. Surging divine power surged out like angry dragons, blocking all the killing attacks coming from the surroundings. With Quang Li's resistance, the killing intent suddenly became several times more intense. Then the hidden killing formations all erupted. Dozens of killing arrays. How can this little bastard's array, Tao level, be so high? He actually arranged so many killing arrays in such a short time. Feeling the surging killing intent, Quang Li's expression finally changed. He didn't put a single killing array in his eyes, even if it was a level 8 array. However, the power of dozens of killing arrays superimposed together was something even an expert like Quang Li had to consider carefully. Bang! 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 In an instant, an extremely terrifying explosion erupted in the death ice field. This explosion was too terrifying. The entire death ice field fell apart, completely turning into ruins. When the explosion was completely over, Quang Li rushed out with disheveled hair. At this moment, Quang Li was in an extremely sorry state. His clothes were tattered, and his hair was disheveled. He looked like a beggar on the street. Little bastard, I won't let you go. Just you wait. Don't let me find you. Once I find you, I'll make you beg for death. Chapter 2299. Spacetime Stone Pillar. Since the method to enter the Spacetime Quicksand River is in the hands of the Quicksand family, and now that Quang Li has been fooled by me, he must be furious. I must enter the Spacetime Quicksand River before he can react. Zhuowen muttered to himself as he sat inside the airship in the starry sky, his eyes flashing. Xiaohei, go faster, Zhuowen said to Xiaohei, who was piloting the airship in front of him. Xiaohei curled her lips and grumbled. However, she didn't delay and immediately increased the speed of the airship to a new height. The Spacetime Quicksand River wasn't particularly far from the Gulan Celestial River, so it only took Zhuowen 3 hours to reach the periphery of the Spacetime Quicksand River. Zhuowen looked at the river suspended in the vast starry sky in the distance with a glimmer of light in his eyes. The Spacetime Quicksand River was composed of spacetime laws, which were much stronger than the surrounding starry sky laws. Therefore, the surrounding starry sky was repelled by the Spacetime Quicksand River. Coupled with the fact that the Spacetime Quicksand River was grayish-white and stretched across the starry sky, it looked like a surging river. There were many cultivators on the periphery of the Spacetime Quicksand River, but compared to the surrounding starry sky, it didn't feel crowded at all. On the contrary, it looked spacious and sparse. There were many buildings around the Spacetime Quicksand River, but Zhuowen could see that these were all temporary buildings. After all, spacetime distortions often appeared near the Spacetime Quicksand River. Therefore, the surrounding buildings could easily be destroyed by the spacetime distortions. Therefore, no one lived around the Spacetime Quicksand River. Only some adventurers would often come here. However, at the outermost periphery of these temporary buildings, an extremely magnificent white jade temple attracted his attention. At a glance, one could tell that this temple had existed for a very long time. In this place where space-time distortions could happen at any time, this temple had remained intact until now. From this, one could see that this temple was not an ordinary building. Back then, Chao Feng had told him about the method to enter the river of space-time quicksand. He had to enter Quicksand Temple, and Zhuowen knew that the White Jade Temple in front of him was the Quicksand Temple that Chao Feng had mentioned. Before Zhuowen got off the airship, he had already changed his appearance. He knew very well that after being tricked by him, Kuang would definitely not let him off. Perhaps he had already spread the news of him to everyone in the Quicksand family. Zhuan's arrival did not attract anyone's attention. Zhuan headed straight for the White Jade Temple. It had to be said that there were quite a number of cultivators here. However, most of them could only look up at the temple. None of them attempted to approach or enter it. Everyone knew that without Wild Gravel's permission, no one could enter the temple. Even though everyone knew that the temple hid the secret to entering the space-time Quicksand River, they still didn't dare to barge in. The Quicksand family was the most powerful force in the old Orchid Star River. No one here dared to risk offending the Quicksand family by entering the temple. Once they barged in, the price they would have to pay would be their life. When Zhuan walked to the entrance, he saw two familiar faces. The two people were a man and a woman. The woman was beautiful, but the man beside her was even more beautiful than the woman. If the man wasn't wearing men's clothes, he might have been mistaken for a woman, and an extremely beautiful woman at that. Zhuan was naturally no stranger to these two people. They were Zhu Ruwei and Yao Xiangjuan, whom he had met once in the Quicksand family. The two also noticed Zhuan walking over. Zhu Ruwei just glanced at Zhuan indifferently. She didn't recognize Zhuan, and her eyes were extremely calm. Yao Xiangjuan, on the other hand, gave Zhuan a meaningful look, and the corners of his mouth revealed an unfathomable smile. Zhuan's eyes were calm. He knew that Yao Xiangjuan should have recognized him. He wasn't surprised by this. Yao Xiangjuan had a pair of strange eyes. Previously, Yao Xiangjuan not only saw through Zhuan's restriction on the heavenly domain star essence in the jade bottle, but also saw through the Wild Gravel's spiritual sense imprint on him. Now that he could see through his disguise, it was reasonable. "Friend, you also entered the space-time Quicksand River? I think you have something urgent to do. Why don't you go in first?" Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhuan and said with a smile, "Thank you." Zhuan cupped his fists and stepped forward. He knew very well that Yao Xiangjuan wanted to help him, so he also intended to accept this kindness. Zhuan knew very well that Wild Gravel should be here soon. At that time, this old man would definitely recognize him. At that time, it would be difficult for him to enter the space-time Quicksand River. Therefore, he certainly couldn't stay here any longer. The more he stayed, the more dangerous it would be. The space inside the temple was quite large, but there weren't many people. In the center of the temple stood a stone pillar. This stone pillar was covered with red runes, and the ancient aura it exuded made Zhuan's heart tremble. The stone pillar reached the top of the temple, supporting the central vein of the entire temple. "This is the space-time stone pillar," Zhuan muttered to himself. Chao Feng had told him a lot about the temple before. Generally, cultivators who entered the space-time Quicksand River must pass through the space-time stone pillar. It was said that the space-time stone pillar was accidentally obtained by Wild Gravel of the Quicksand family. Moreover, they relied on the space-time stone pillar to build the temple around it. It was also because of this space-time stone pillar that the temple wasn't affected by the space-time Quicksand River spatial distortion and stood until now. Around the space-time stone pillar, there were three black-robed old men sitting cross-legged. Zhuan's arrival immediately attracted the attention of the three black-robed old men. The skinny old man sitting in the center glanced at Zhuan and said indifferently, "Do you have a qualification token?" Zhuan didn't waste any time and threw the qualification token in his hand to the black-robed old man. These three old men weren't simple. They were all powerhouses of the Void Sky 8th step, especially the skinny old man. He was probably at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step at the very least. These three were all powerhouses of the Quicksand family. The fact that the Quicksand family could send these three powerhouses to guard the space-time stone pillar showed how important it was to the space-time stone pillar. After Zhuan handed over the qualification token, Zhu Ruwei and Yao Xiangjuan entered the temple. "Senior brother, why did you let this person in first?" Zhu Ruwei looked at Zhuan with some displeasure. Yao Xiangjuan smiled and said, "This person is an old friend of ours. and he might be a little troublesome. There's nothing wrong with letting him in first. Zhu Rui was puzzled. She glanced at Zhuan again and found that he gave her a very unfamiliar feeling. She was sure that she had never seen this person before. So why did Yao Xiangjuan say that this person was an old friend of hers? Just as Yao Xiangjuan was about to explain, his gaze suddenly changed, and he turned to look outside the temple. Chapter 2300. Battle, stop this kid. Don't let him get close to the space-time stone pillar. A thunderous voice came from the periphery of the river of space-time, ringing in the ears of all the cultivators. The skinny old man who had just finished checking and returned the qualification tokened to Zhuan with the intention of letting him enter the space-time stone pillar, snorted coldly, and reached out with his right hand, grabbing at Zhuan. Surging divine power formed an unprecedentedly large hand and grabbed at Zhuan. What's going on? Zhu Rui was completely dumbfounded. She didn't expect such a sudden turn of events. Although the voice just now was unfamiliar to her, she vaguely guessed that it was most likely the voice of the drifting sand family's ancestor, Kuang Li. Think about it. Besides Kuang Li, there was no other person in the drifting sand family who could order the three black-robed old men to attack the space-time stone pillar. Yao Xiangjuan frowned and pulled Zhu Rui out of the divine temple. He sighed as he looked at the young man who was enveloped by the skinny old man's divine power hand. Yao Xiangjuan knew very well that these three old men were the drifting sand family's hidden, undying old men. They were all very powerful. Zhuan's cultivation was only at the peak of the six-step void sky stage. Facing these three powerhouses was a dead end. Not to mention Zhuan. Even if Yao Xiangjuan went up himself, he would only barely be able to protect himself. He might not even be able to escape. Rumble. The moment the divine power hand completely enveloped Zhuan, a sharp sword light soared into the sky. Then, the divine power hand collapsed with a loud bang. Terrifying shock waves tore the surrounding space apart, turning into a storm that swept out. The tall stone pillars around the divine temple were all shattered by the shock waves. In just an instant, the divine temple collapsed, revealing the space-time stone pillar at the center of the divine temple. The many cultivators who were originally active in the periphery of the river of space-time were completely attracted by the battle in the divine temple. In particular, when they saw an unknown young man facing off against three black-robed old men, many of the surrounding cultivators were surprised. Who is this person? He actually provoked three temple guardians. Is he courting death? This person's aura is only at the peak of the sixth step of the void sky realm. I don't know what he did to provoke the guardians of the divine temple. It seems like he's going to be in trouble. The uproar in the surroundings became more and more intense, especially when someone discovered that Zhuan's aura was only at the peak of the sixth step of the void sky realm. Everyone was even more shocked and felt that this strange youth was courting death. Sigh, it's still too late. I'm afraid that Zhuan will be killed by the guardian of the divine temple before Kuang Li even arrives. Yao Xiangjuan shook his head and looked at the back of the young man who was facing the three temple guardians with a complicated gaze. Although the sound of the wild gravel rolled over, Yao Xiangjuan could see that the wild gravel was still quite a distance away. It would take some time for the wild gravel to arrive. That sentence just now was to remind the temple guardian to stop Zhuan. Zhuan? Senior brother, you said that this person is Zhuan? Zhu Rui also reacted now and looked at the young man's back in surprise. No wonder Yao Xiangjuan said that this person was their old friend, so this person was Zhuan. Zhu Rui did not doubt Yao Xiangjuan's judgment. She was very clear about the strangeness of Yao Xiangjuan's eyes. Any disguise would be useless in front of Yao Xiangjuan. Zhu Rui fell silent as she looked at Zhuan's back with a complicated expression. She sighed in her heart. Although she didn't know how Zhuan had offended the wild gravel, she now knew that Zhuan wouldn't be able to escape this calamity. Not to mention the wild gravel. Even the three temple guardians in front of him could easily kill Zhuan. The skinny old man looked at Zhuan in surprise. He didn't expect that the boy in front of him would be able to block his divine power attack. Although it was just a casual attack, It should have been more than enough to kill an ant of the sixth step of the Void Sky realm. However, the situation now was that the ant he thought was actually able to block his attack. It seems that you do have some skills. Although I do not know what you've done to cause Lord Kuang Li to go to such great lengths, I do know that since you've offended Lord Kuang Li, you will die without a burial ground. The skinny old man smiled slightly. His right hand formed a claw and tore the void. Suddenly, countless claw shadows burst out from the void and enveloped Zhuowen. Zhuowen silently looked at the incoming claw shadow, and with a flick of his finger, a divine sword covered in lightning and fire energy shot out. The thunder fire sword suddenly slashed the void, and the lightning and fire energy swept out like a gale. Suddenly, the surrounding claw shadows were torn to pieces by the lightning and fire energy. Little blood disciple, follow me. Let's kill this old fart together. After the thunder fire sword shattered the claw shadows, Xiaohei called the blood immortal sword and attacked the skinny old man. The skinny old man's face changed slightly. He didn't expect the young man to have such a divine weapon. It actually broke his attack so easily. Moreover, the skinny old man could faintly feel that the thunder fire sword's power was extremely terrifying. It was probably not weaker than him, so the skinny old man didn't dare to be careless. The two of you kill this boy. Don't let him escape. The skinny old man ordered the other two old men. Then, he stomped his right foot and rushed toward the thunderfire sword. Boom! Boom! In just an instant, the skinny old man and the thunderfire sword collided. The two were evenly matched, and it was difficult to tell who would win. However, with the help of the blood immortal sword, the thunderfire sword had the upper hand in the battle with the skinny old man. While the skinny old man and the thunderfire sword were fighting, the other two black-robed old men had already arrived in front of Zhuowen. The two old men's eyes were slightly contemptuous. They were both experts at the early stage of the Void Sky 8th step. Naturally, they wouldn't be so cautious and serious when dealing with an ant at the peak of the Void Sky 6th step. Zhuowen also saw the two old men's casual attacks and sneered in his heart. Although the strength of Zhuowen's original body was inferior to that of his doppelganger, it was definitely extremely powerful. The two old men were only at the early stage of the Void Sky 8th step. How did they look down on him? They were simply courting death. Thinking of this, Zhuowen held the king's sword in his hand and spread the torch dragon wings behind him. He turned into an afterimage and dodged the two old men's attacks. Destruction Sword Technique. The moment he dodged the attack, Zhuowen immediately performed the Destruction Sword Technique. He performed the first sword move, the sword piercing brambles, to the seventh sword move, the sword swimming great void, in one breath. The sword light was like a waterfall. It went against the flow of the Destruction Sword Technique and whistled toward the two old men. Chapter 23:01. Exterminate. You're not a cultivator of the 6 steps of the Void Sky. One of the old men couldn't help but look at Zhuowen. He immediately used all of his strength to block the sword light. This sword light was too powerful. A mere cultivator of the 6 steps of the Void Sky would definitely not be able to use such a terrifying sword light. I'm a cultivator of the 6 steps of the Void Sky, but I'm not an ordinary cultivator. Zhuowen grinned. The Emperor's sword in his hand changed again, and he used the 8th sword move, Sword Dragon, slashing the heavens. In an instant, the sword light surged out and formed a huge dragon in front of Zhuowen that exuded a sharp sword aura. The dragon roared and instantly enveloped the old man's entire body. The old man was already struggling to resist the sharp sword aura, so how could he have any extra strength to resist this terrifying sword dragon? The moment the sword dragon swallowed the old man, a blood-curdling scream rang out. Of course, the scream only lasted for a moment before it disappeared. It was obvious that the old man had completely fallen. You're not a cultivator of the 6 steps of the Void Sky. You're hiding your cultivation. When the other old man saw his companion being killed in an instant, he was shocked. He stomped his right foot and immediately fled into the distance. His strength was about the same as his companion's. His companion was so easily killed by Zhuowen. If he stubbornly resisted, he would be defeated sooner or later. It was better to escape as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Zhuowen would not let this old man go so easily. Zhuowen's eyes became sharp, and then a golden light flashed out from between his eyebrows. Soul kill. The golden light was very fast, and it immediately rushed into the old man's forehead. The old man's body stiffened, and a painful expression appeared on his face. Of course, this pain only lasted for 3 breaths of time before the old man regained his consciousness. When the old man wanted to continue escaping, it was already too late. 3 breaths of time was enough for Zhuowen to catch up to the old man. Sword dragon slashing the heavens. An indifferent voice slowly sounded from behind the old man. The old man abruptly turned around, and what greeted him was an incomparably huge dragon formed from countless sword cheese. When the second elder completely fell, everyone around was dumbfounded. Some people even rubbed their eyes, thinking that they were hallucinating. So strong. Zhu Rui stood not too far away. Her cherry lips parted slightly as she watched the scene unfold. After a long while, she finally uttered these 2 words. Yao Xiangjuan smiled bitterly and said, "It seems that I misjudged him. This Zhuowen is really not simple. I'm afraid his strength is stronger than mine." The skinny old man, who was originally entangled with the Thunderfire sword, also noticed the 2 fallen companions. Immediately, his eyes widened and he was shocked. He wanted to attack and kill the culprit. Unfortunately, the Thunderfire sword was not to be trifled with. It firmly entangled the skinny old man, causing him to only be able to passively resist. "Old man, don't be so anxious. Your master dragon will soon send you to see your 2 fellow sufferers. Don't worry." Xiaohei's nature was difficult to change. When he saw Zhuowen quickly deal with the other 2, he couldn't help but feel complacent and start to boast. The skinny old man was furious when he heard this and said, "Die." As he spoke, the skinny old man suddenly withdrew the illusory sky bridge. Then his illusory sky bridge actually started to burn, and the skinny old man's aura instantly rose to an extremely terrifying level in a short period of time. Bang! The skinny old man suddenly blasted out a punch, and the Thunderfire sword and Blood Immortal sword were actually blasted back repeatedly. Motherfucker, this old man is burning the illusory sky bridge. Kid, I'll leave this old man to you. This master dragon is a little tired. I'm going to rest first. I think your strength is sufficient to annihilate this arrogant old man. When Xiaohei saw the skinny old man burn the illusory sky bridge and increase his strength by several times, he immediately became terrified and consciously retreated behind Zhuowen. Zhuowen was slightly speechless as he looked at Xiaohei, who was clearly cowering but was still clamoring endlessly. This fellow's skin is really getting thicker and thicker. He's really incurable. Bang! Not long after Xiaohei hid behind Zhuowen, the skinny old man's attack had already flashed over. The illusory sky bridge above the skinny old man's head was burning, and his expression was ferocious and murderous. Zhuowen stood silently and fearlessly facing the skinny old man who was getting closer and closer. Many cultivators in the surroundings watched this scene with rapt attention. Everyone knew that the skinny old man had burned the illusory sky bridge. As everyone knew, although burning the illusory sky bridge could temporarily increase one's strength by several times, the side effects were very great. This was because one's realm would inevitably drop after the event. Generally, only cultivators in a life and death situation would use this method to burn the illusory sky bridge. The skinny old man's strength was already very strong. Now that he had burned the illusory sky bridge, his strength was even more terrifying. The surrounding people wanted to see how this mysterious young man would deal with such a powerful skinny old man. Heaven and earth splitter. Zhuowen slowly raised the king's sword and then slowly slashed it in front of him. It was very gentle, as if he was performing a sword dance. With one slash, the sky split open, the earth shattered, and the world collapsed. At this moment, tens of thousands of miles of space with Zhuowen as the center completely collapsed. Moreover, this collapse was not an ordinary one. It was a complete collapse. The entire starry sky was crushed into nothingness by this collapse. Even the darkness seemed to have lost all meaning in this collapse. The skinny old man, who was about to approach Zhuowen, had a drastic change in expression when the surrounding space collapsed. Afterward, he found that his movements were completely restricted. He wanted to move, but he found that his movements had become very slow. It was as if there was a huge mountain pressing down on him. Zhuowen stood in the center of the collapsed space and put away his sword. He silently looked at the skinny old man who was moving slowly and said indifferently, "Farewell." As soon as these words were spoken, countless violent sword intents surged out from the collapsed space. From afar, it looked like a violent storm was raging in the collapsed space, and the storm was formed by sword intents. Countless sword intents pierced through the skinny old man's body. The skinny old man screamed and was finally torn into pieces by the countless sword intents. The illusory sky bridge was also shattered into pieces. As soon as the skinny old man died, countless sword intents surged into Zhuowen's king's sword in the center like tadpoles in water. The collapsed space of tens of thousands of miles gradually returned to its original appearance of the starry sky chart. Suddenly, the surroundings fell into silence. Everyone raised their heads and stared at the young man, standing in the void with his hands behind his back. No one had expected such an outcome. Just think about it. One side was only a young man at the 6th level of the illusory sky bridge, while the other side had 3 peerless powerhouses at the 8th level of the illusory sky bridge. The disparity between the two sides was extremely large, but the final result made everyone's jaws drop. A young man at the 6th level of the illusory sky bridge had easily slaughtered 3 temple guardians at the 8th level of the illusory sky bridge. This result was absolutely crazy in the eyes of many people. Zhuowen slowly turned his head to look at the distant horizon. There, a figure exuding an extremely violent aura was rushing towards them at high speed. "Li, wait until Zhuowen, come out of the river of space-time quicksand again. I'll look for you. You'd better wash your neck clean." Chapter 23:02. Enter the river of time and space quicksand. The moment Zhuowen disappeared into the space-time stone pillar, Wild Gravel had already arrived near the space-time stone pillar. When he saw the mess around him, he was so angry that he trembled. "Little bastard, I won't let you leave this place alive." Li took a deep breath, his eyes filled with resentment. His loss this time could not be said to be small. The 3 temple guardians were the cornerstones of his quicksand family. Now that they had fallen, the impact on the quicksand family was not small. This time, I'm afraid that Kuang Lu will send a large number of troops to guard this place. If Brother Zhua comes out of the river of space-time quicksand, he will most likely be doomed. In the distance, Yao Xiangjuan glanced at Kuang Li, who had landed near the space-time stone pillar, and muttered softly. Zhu Rui nodded in agreement and said, "Senior brother, are we going in now?" Kuang Li is still angry. "Go in. What are you afraid of? The Drifting Sand family is only the strongest family in the old Orchid Galaxy. Don't tell me they want to dominate the entire 6 Desires heavenly realm." Yao Xiangjuan smiled and walked toward the time and space stone pillar. Zhu Rui followed closely behind. Kuang Li was still in a state of rage when he noticed that 2 more people were approaching the space-time stone pillar. His eyes widened as a powerful aura pressed down on Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Rui. Yao Xiangjuan was already prepared. With a wave of his sleeve, he took out a jade token. The surface of the jade-colored token emitted a jade-colored light, which instantly enveloped Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Rui. The imposing aura fell on the jade-colored light and dissipated. Kuang Li's eyes narrowed. He looked at the jade token floating above Yao Xiangjuan's head in astonishment, and his gaze finally changed. "Are you a disciple of 6 Desires Palace?" Kuang Li asked in a deep voice. The corners of Yao Xiangjuan's mouth curled into a smile. He did not answer Kuang Li's question directly. Instead, he continued to walk slowly toward the space-time pillar. Master Wild Gravel, I just want to try my luck in the temporal quicksand river. I hope you don't mind. Although Yao Xiangjuan's words were polite, he didn't look at Kuang Li. He didn't even stop walking. Kuang Li's eyes immediately darkened, but when he saw the jade token floating above Yao Xiangjuan's head, he suppressed his anger. It was not the first time he had seen such a jade token. Generally, those who possessed such a jade token had a high status in the Six Desires Palace. The Six Desires Palace was a colossus in the Six Desires heavenly domain. In front of the Six Desires Palace, the Quicksand family was like an ant. Although Kuang Li was angry, he did not dare to act recklessly. After Yao Xiangjuan and Zhu Rui entered the space-time pillar, Kuang Li snorted coldly and left. This time, he had to make a trip back. He needed to send more troops to guard the space-time pillar. He might not dare to touch Yao Xiangjuan, but he had to touch Zhuowen. A mere loose cultivator had actually killed the Divine Temple's guardian and even tricked Wild Gravel himself. Wild Gravel would definitely not be able to take this lying down. As long as Zhuowen showed any signs of coming out, Kuang Li would not let him off. He would definitely capture him and torture him to death. Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. What appeared in front of him was a desert. His divine sense could cover this desert, but when he reached the edge of the desert, there was only an endless void. He could not touch the end. Zhuowen unfolded his torch dragon wings and rushed out of the desert. What he came into contact with was still an endless space. There was no color or form. He could only feel the space coming and going, but he could not really control the transformation of this space. There was no direction, no position, and no aura of life. There was only emptiness and nothingness. Zhuowen kept flapping his torch dragon wings and flew tirelessly. He wanted to know what was at the end of this desert. After flying for a few days, Zhuowen found that the desert he was standing in had completely disappeared. In front of him was an empty gray space. The ground, the sky, and even his breathing had a gray feeling. Zhuowen took a deep breath and stopped. He knew that he should have completely entered the space-time quicksand river. Now, he should be in an area with spatial laws. In this place, space constantly overlapped with each other. With the alternation of spatial laws, space also constantly changed. It looked like many blocks piled up together. If one of the squares represented a kind of space, then when you jumped out of that square, you might enter a different square. That is to say, Zhuowen should be shuttling between spaces right now. The desert he had just experienced was one space, and the empty gray space he was experiencing now was another. In this place, as long as you kept moving, you might go from one space to another. You might also be trapped in one space forever, never to come out. The aura of spatial laws here was extremely rich. For cultivators, it was indeed an excellent place to comprehend spatial laws. However, at the same time, it was also the most dangerous place. With overlapping spaces, you wouldn't know where you were. It was like falling into an endless maze. If you couldn't find a right exit, you would never be able to leave this place. Zhuowen took out a dim yellow map from his spirit ring. This map was the location of the space-time key he obtained from the Devourer King. Zhuowen looked at this map carefully and found that it was divided into 3 areas. They were the spatial law area, the temporal law area, and the space-time law area. The space-time key was hidden somewhere in the space-time law area. In other words, if Zhuowen wanted to obtain the space-time key, he had to enter the space-time law area. The foundation of entering the space-time law area was that he had to pass through the spatial and temporal law areas. The best way to pass through these 2 areas was to have a preliminary understanding of these 2 laws. Then, he would have to rely on his own understanding to explore and move forward. After keeping the map, Zhuowen started to switch spaces continuously. Time flowed by in this boring space switch. Zhuowen was completely immersed in it. The reason why Zhuowen kept switching between different spaces was because he noticed that every time he switched from one space to another, the spatial laws emitted were the densest. This was beneficial for Zhuowen's comprehension. During these switches, he had experienced all kinds of spaces: desert space, swamp space, forest space, ocean space, mountain space. There was nothing in the gray space, the empty world, the wind blade world. He had experienced spatial collapse, spatial dislocation, spatial cracks. In this place, he even felt spatial folding and spatial distortion. Chapter 2303. Comprehending Space. When Zhuowen went to school in his previous life, he learned about the basics of space. The so-called space essence was a form of material objective existence. However, as Zhuowen continued to touch the surrounding space, he discovered that space was indeed a kind of material. Moreover, the adjacent spaces between spaces were separated by endless distances. If you wanted to use ordinary methods to cross from one space to another, it would be very difficult to do. It was like an ant wanting to cross the ocean. It was simply impossible. However, if you compared the two spaces to the two ends of a piece of paper and folded the paper in half, then the two ends of the paper would be very close. Zhuowen knew that the power that could make this paper fold in half was the law of space. As long as Zhuowen could comprehend the law of space, then he would have the ability to break the barrier between adjacent spaces. He would be able to easily break the space barrier and leave this overlapping space area. However, although Zhuowen knew the truth, what could he do to comprehend the law of space more efficiently? Thinking of this, Zhuowen's gaze fell on the countless overlapping spaces in front of him. His eyes flickered, and an extremely powerful divine sense suddenly blasted out from between his eyebrows. Zhuowen's divine sense was now extremely powerful. The divine sense hand formed from it was even stronger than an 8-step void sky cultivator. The divine sense hand instantly swept out and grabbed the edge of the space in front of Zhuowen. At the same time, Zhuowen once again created another divine sense hand and grabbed the edge of the space he was in. The moment the two divine sense hands grabbed the edge of the two spaces, Zhuowen roared and gradually drew the two spaces closer. If outsiders were to see this scene, they would definitely think that Zhuowen had gone crazy. Everyone knew that there was a strong barrier between adjacent spaces. Only by mastering the law of space could one break this barrier, allowing cultivators to easily cross spaces. However, Zhuowen had not completely mastered the law of space. He had just entered this place, but he actually tried to use his divine sense to forcibly break the barrier between spaces. This was absolutely a bold approach. If there was even the slightest mistake, perhaps his life would be in danger. Fortunately, Zhuowen's divine sense was too strong, and he was able to withstand the huge impact brought about by breaking through the spatial barrier. If an ordinary cultivator were to do so, he would definitely be courting death. After all, the impact of breaking the spatial barrier was very terrifying. Ordinary cultivators would probably be annihilated into nothingness the moment they broke through the spatial barrier. Of course, Zhuowen did not feel particularly good either. After all, he had to bear the brunt of the spatial barrier every time. If it were not for the fact that he had absorbed the true dragon's blood and reached the level of Devourer, he definitely would not have been able to endure it. Moreover, as Zhuowen continued to break through the gaps in space, his grasp of the laws of space became more and more skillful. Naturally, his comprehension of the laws of space also became more and more profound. Zhuowen shuttled through space like a madman. Moreover, the deeper his comprehension of the spatial law, the faster his shuttling speed became. Zhuowen immersed himself in this state of enlightenment. While immersed in this demon-like state of enlightenment, Zhuowen benefited a lot. At the very least, his use of the laws of space had almost reached the point of perfection. Time gradually passed. 1 year, 2 years, Zhuowen had been immersed in this demon-like state of enlightenment for 4 years. It could be said that Zhuowen's consciousness had become a little blurry. He instinctively used his divine sense to grab the barrier between two adjacent spaces. He instinctively broke through the barrier and instinctively entered the next space. Suddenly, a scream completely awakened Zhuowen. At this moment, Zhuowen happened to arrive at another space. This was an oasis space filled with huge oases. The oases were surrounded by endless deserts. The oases were the only places of life in the endless desert. At this moment, Zhuowen was standing on an oasis. In front of him stood a topless woman. Zhuowen was holding the woman's undergarment and bedding. When Zhuowen's gaze fell on the woman's face, he was suddenly stunned. The woman who appeared in front of him was simply too beautiful. She had a head full of silky black hair that fluttered in the wind. She had slender eyebrows, a pair of eyes that shone like the stars and the bright moon. She had a delicate nose, rosy cheeks, cherry red lips, and a flawless oval face that was pure white and flawless. Her tender snow-white skin was extraordinarily beautiful, and her figure was lithe and elegant. On the other hand, the woman's naked upper body was as white as snow. Her skin was smooth and delicate, causing one to be unable to move their eyes away and forget to leave. "You lecherous prodigal." The woman covered the pair of soft breasts in front of her with her lily-white hands. Her pretty face was still blushing. She glared at Zhuowen with resentment. Zhuowen showed a puzzled look. Immediately, he looked at the undergarment and bedding in his hand, and an embarrassed look appeared on his face. Needless to say, Zhuowen also knew what he had done. It should be that when he was comprehending the law of space and used his divine sense to break the space barrier, he accidentally tore off the clothes of the beautiful woman in this oasis. Of course, all of this was unintentional by Zhuowen. The woman was also caught off guard, so she was caught off guard. Moreover, because Zhuowen's divine sense was too powerful, the undergarment and bedding in his hand were torn to pieces. Obviously, they could not be worn anymore. "Miss, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I was just comprehending the law of space, so..." Zhuowen apologized. This time, he really went too far. Seeing Zhuowen's sincere apology, the beautiful woman calmed down. She looked up and down at Zhuowen. Her beautiful eyes narrowed, but soon returned to normal. "I don't have any clothes on me. Do you have any clothes in your spirit ring? Let me wear them." The beautiful woman was silent for a moment, and finally bit her lower lip with her pearly white teeth, and said to Zhuowen. Zhuowen was startled and immediately looked at the woman in front of him with a strange look. He didn't expect that this woman didn't have any spare clothes on her. No wonder she didn't change her clothes immediately after he tore them off. "I do have some clothes on me, but they are all men's clothes. I'm afraid they are not suitable for you, right?" Zhuowen hesitated. "It doesn't matter, as long as I can wear them," the beautiful woman said generously. Zhuowen nodded. He didn't hesitate to do things. With a wave of his sleeve, he took out a white robe from his spirit ring and threw it to the woman. Immediately, he turned around very consciously. The beautiful woman took the clothes and sighed. Seeing Zhuowen consciously turn around, she let go of her jade-like hands covering her important parts and began to quickly put on the clothes. "You turn around. Just now I saw your divine sense big hand grab here. What do you want to catch?" After changing the clothes, the beautiful woman finally spoke, but her voice was a little cold. Chapter 2304. Space crystallization. What? You use your divine sense to grab the barrier between adjacent spaces? How is that possible? Even an 8-step void sky cultivator can't do it. The beautiful woman was startled and immediately revealed a look of disbelief. After all, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the 6-step void sky. How could his divine sense giant hand have the power to break the barrier between spaces? Zhuowen didn't say anything and just grabbed forward. Suddenly, the beautiful woman, who was still a dozen meters away from Zhuowen, appeared in front of Zhuowen at some unknown time. The beautiful woman looked at this scene in a daze. She was sure that she and Zhuowen didn't move a step, but the distance between them was shortened just like that. "Is this the space law? You've mastered the space law?" The beautiful woman looked at Zhuowen with shining eyes. She obviously didn't expect the latter to have mastered the space law. "It should be, at least the barrier between spaces is nothing to me," Zhuowen said with a faint smile. The beautiful woman took a deep look at Zhuan and said with shining eyes, "Senior brother, can you tell me what you've comprehended?" Zhuan scratched his head awkwardly and said with a smile, "Miss, I can't explain it. I used my divine sense giant hand to break the barrier between spaces to comprehend the space law, but I don't know what the space law is." The beautiful woman nodded and didn't show any disappointment. The space law was originally an inexplicable thing. "Senior brother, you should be Zhuan, right? I've seen you before the Quicksand family. At that time, you asked Grandmaster Quangli to help you refine a tool?" The beautiful woman suddenly changed the topic. Zhuan glanced at the woman and didn't doubt her words. At that time, he asked the dancer to inform Quangli in front of everyone in the Quicksand family. For this reason, he had a small conflict with the dancer. As long as it was a cultivator present at that time, basically all the cultivators present knew about him. "Miss, if there's nothing else, this Zhuo will take his leave first." Zhuan didn't want to be entangled with the woman in front of him. If he hadn't unintentionally offended her, the two of them wouldn't have had any interaction. "Hold on, Brother Zhuo. Are you interested in the space crystal?" The beautiful woman suddenly called out to Zhuan. "Spatial crystal?" Zhuan abruptly turned around and stared at the beautiful woman behind him. He couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "How could he not know about space crystals?" These things contained extremely rich space laws, and the most widespread use of space crystals was for cultivators to absorb them. This allowed them to more easily approach the space laws, and it was extremely beneficial for comprehending the space laws. Apart from that, the spatial crystal was the best material for crafting a flying divine artifact. With the addition of spatial proximity, a flying divine artifact could perform spatial jumps, greatly increasing the speed of a flying divine artifact. The so-called space jump was a flying divine artifact that could jump from one end of space to the other in an instant. The distance was extremely large, and a powerful flying divine artifact could even cross half the heaven domain in an instant. However, space crystals were extremely rare and extremely difficult to find in the outside world. These things could only be condensed in places with extremely rich space laws. Many cultivators who wanted to explore the river of space-time quicksand not only wanted to comprehend the space laws, but also wanted to try their luck and obtain treasures such as space crystals. Of course, even in the river of space-time quicksand, the number of space crystals was extremely small. For many years, the number of cultivators who had entered the river of space-time quicksand could be counted on one hand. This showed how rare space crystals were. However, this beautiful woman in front of him said that she had news of space crystals. How could Zhuan not be interested? "You have news of space crystals?" Zhuan asked excitedly. The beautiful woman said with a cautious look, "Yes. When I first entered the river of space-time quicksand, I accidentally fell into a dangerous place. I saw many space crystals there, but it was full of space collapse and space distortion. It was extremely terrifying. For someone like me who hasn't comprehended the slightest space law, going in would be suicide." Zhuan nodded, then looked at the woman in front of him with narrowed eyes and said indifferently, "Miss, you and I have only met by chance, and the space crystal is extremely important. Are you really willing to tell me the location of the space crystal?" Zhuan couldn't help but doubt the woman in front of him. He didn't think that this woman would be so kind as to share such important information with someone she had only met once. It was really unbelievable. Zhuan had been wandering in the starry sky for so long that he had already understood the ways of the world. He was no longer a newborn calf. He would never believe that a pie would fall from the sky, because my brother said that you are a man of principle. The beautiful woman suddenly smiled. "Your brother?" Zhuan asked in surprise. "My name is Yao Xiangjuan. My brother is called Yao Xiangjuan. I think you know him?" The woman smiled tenderly. "Yao Xiangjuan?" Zhuan raised his eyebrows. Soon after, he carefully observed the absolute beauty in front of him. He discovered that this woman was indeed quite similar to Yao Xiangjuan. Moreover, this woman was much more beautiful than Yao Xiangjuan. Her entire body was filled with a feminine charm. "Your brother believes in me? You believe in me so much?" Zhuowen said with some amusement. Yao Xiangjuan didn't take it seriously and said, "My brother's judgment is always right because what his eyes see is always the truth. Since he said that you are a man of principle, then you are a man of principle." Hearing this, Zhuowen couldn't help but recall that Yao Xiangjuan had once told him about the strangeness of his eyes. Yao Xiangjuan's eyes could see through some hypocrisy and restrictions, but he didn't expect that they could also see through a person's character. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen decided to go with Yao Xiangjuan to have a look. After all, the space crystal was really tempting to him. If what Yao Xiangjuan said was true, then Zhuowen would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Of course, even if Yao Xiangjuan deceived him, Zhuowen wasn't afraid. With his current strength, Yao Xiangjuan couldn't trick him. Of course, Zhuowen was also on guard against this woman because he hadn't been able to detect her specific cultivation from beginning to end. Obviously, this woman had an extremely powerful concealment secret method. "Then, please lead the way, Miss Yao." Zhuowen cupped his fists and said. The space Yao Xiangjuan and Zhua, when we're in, was a desert full of dilapidated fences and dilapidated walls. There was no sign of life in this space, and it was deathly silent. Chapter 23:05. A huge harvest. After Yao Xiangjuan led Zhuowen for 2 hours, Yao Xiangjuan stopped, pointed to the void in front of them, and said, "There are space crystals on the other side of the void." At that time, my head just happened to fall into the void, and I saw the scene inside. If I wasn't lucky enough to leave the void in advance, I'm afraid I would have been completely annihilated by the spatial distortion inside. Later on, I tried to enter the other side of the void several times, but I found that I couldn't enter at all. It was as if there was some kind of law obstructing me. I knew that unless I comprehended the law of space, I wouldn't be able to enter the other side of the void. At this point, Yao Xiangjuan turned to look at Zhuowen, her beautiful eyes filled with anticipation. Zhuowen nodded and said, "Let me try." After saying that, Zhuowen took a step with his right foot, and with just one step, the space around Zhuowen was compressed and shortened, and Zhuowen instantly disappeared from where he was, as if he had teleported, entering the void in front of him. Zhuowen took over 10 steps forward, directly passing through the spatial collapses behind the void. In the end, he arrived at a crystalline world. When Zhuowen saw this world, his whole body trembled because there were at least hundreds of space crystals dotted here. Hundreds of space crystals? This was definitely a huge number. Generally speaking, it was extremely rare to have a few. Now, there were hundreds of space crystals here. This absolutely shocked Zhuowen. With so many space crystals, it was enough to simply build a small spaceship. Of course, generally speaking, spaceships built with space crystals wouldn't be so wasteful. They would use space crystals as the core and other materials to support the creation of a real spaceship. Looking at this crystal clear world, Zhuowen took a step with his right foot and left this place. When Zhuowen returned to Yao Xiangjuan, the latter hurriedly asked, "Brother Zhua, how is it? Are there space crystals inside?" Zhuowen nodded and said, "There are indeed space crystals inside. According to the original agreement, I will bring you in." Zhuowen stretched out his right hand and looked at Yao Xiangjuan with his clear eyes. Yao Xiangjuan was not a bashful woman. She naturally held Zhuowen's right hand. Then, Zhuowen exerted force and took more than 10 steps in the air. Instantly, the surrounding space was compressed. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the crystal-clear world. So beautiful! Yao Xiangjuan looked at the sparkling and translucent world in front of her and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. This sparkling and translucent world was a transparent world. At first glance, it was as if the entire world was made of sparkling diamonds. "Zhuowen, you are indeed a man of principle." "Thank you." Yao Xiangjuan turned around and looked at Zhuowen with an extremely serious expression as she smiled sweetly. In Yao Xiangjuan's opinion, Zhuowen could have monopolized all the space crystals here, since it was his first time here. Then he could have come out and said that there were no space crystals here. Yao Xiangjuan had nothing to say. However, Zhuowen didn't do that. Instead, after he finished exploring, he immediately came back and brought Yao Xiangjuan into this world again. He presented the space crystals here to her without reservation. Zhuowen smiled. Just as Yao Xiangjuan said, Zhuowen had his own principles. Since this place was provided by Yao Xiangjuan, Zhuowen had no intention of monopolizing it from the beginning. Without the help of Brother Zhuo's space law, even if I knew that there were space crystals here, it would be useless. Let's split the space crystals here 50-50. Yao Xiangjuan suddenly turned to look at Zhuowen and said with a smile. Zhuowen nodded, indicating that he had no objection. Immediately, the two of them began to plunder the space crystals around them. After a while, they had collected all the space crystals in the surrounding area. The two of them counted and found that they had collected more than 400 space crystals. If they divided them equally, it would be more than 200 space crystals for each of them. If news of this spread to the outside world, it would definitely cause a great sensation. After all, space crystals were rarely seen, but Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan had obtained more than 200 space crystals each. This was definitely an unimaginable wealth. With these space crystals, I am confident that I can completely comprehend the space law within half a year. Zhuowen, thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have obtained so many space crystals, Yao Xiangjuan said excitedly. I should be the one thanking you. If you hadn't brought me here, how could I have obtained so many space crystals? I have to go now. See you later, Zhuowen said with a smile. The starry sky energy here is so rich. It's very suitable for cultivation. Don't you want to stay here and cultivate first? Yao Xiangjuan asked in surprise. Zhuowen shook his head. He had his own plans. Although he had obtained a lot of benefits because of Yao Xiangjuan, he was very clear about the purpose of this trip. It was definitely impossible for him to stay with outsiders. The space-time key was very important. If he stayed with Yao Xiangjuan, he might have to enter the depths of the space-time quicksand river with her. This was not the result that Zhuowen wanted. No, I still have a lot of things to do, so I won't stay. By the way, isn't your brother Yao Xiangjuan? Why didn't you enter the space-time quicksand river with your brother? Before leaving, Zhuowen looked at Yao Xiangjuan and could not help but ask in surprise. That Yao Xiangjuan was not an ordinary person. Even this beautiful Yao Xiangjuan in front of him, Zhuowen felt that she was not simple. He knew that the origins of this pair of siblings should be extraordinary. Oh, it's like this. I secretly came here behind my brother's back. So after you go out, don't tell my brother. Yao Xiangjuan stuck out her tongue and said. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly, but he quickly recovered his calmness. He cupped his fists and said to Yao Xiangjuan, Miss Yao, farewell. See you later. After he finished speaking, Zhuowen left this place, leaving Yao Xiangjuan behind to fall into deep thought. This little girl shouldn't be telling the truth. Xiaohe stood on Zhuowen's shoulder and said with a smile. Zhuowen nodded. He knew that Yao Xiangjuan's last sentence was a lie without Xiaohe saying it. Since Yao Xiangjuan knew him from the beginning and said that she had seen him, Zhuowen, in the Quicksand family, and her brother Yao Xiangjuan had also mentioned him, Zhuowen, then the siblings must have met before entering the space-time quicksand river. Now, Yao Xiangjuan said that he had come here behind her brother's back. These words were obviously contradictory. However, regardless of whether Yao Xiangjuan was lying or not, it was no longer important to Zhuowen. After he left the space-time quicksand river this time, he would probably not have any interactions with Yao Xiangjuan and her brother. Before leaving this place, I'll find a space to advance to the 7th step Void Sky Realm. Chapter 23:06. Breaking through the void sky, 7th level. This was a world of volcanoes, and the surroundings were filled with a dense flame aura. The temperature had reached an unprecedented level, and the active volcanoes were constantly spewing out terrifying magma. Zhuowen came to the interior of a dried-up volcano and after setting up layers of restrictions, he sat cross-legged on a praying mat that he had prepared beforehand. At the same time, he took out a pill from his spirit ring. This pill had 7 golden patterns on its surface, and it was the 7 profound pill that Zhuowen had obtained from Yao Xiangjuan. Zhuowen's cultivation had reached the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky realm for some time now. Moreover, his comprehension of the Void Sky realm had basically reached its peak. The only thing he lacked was an opportunity, and the 7 profound pill would become his opportunity to advance to the 7th step of the Void Sky realm. Thinking of this, Zhuowen suddenly crushed the 7 profound pill in his hand, and then 7 golden dragon-like bars burst out from the 7 profound pill, instantly wrapping around Zhuowen's entire body. Time gradually passed, and in the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. On this day, 2 figures rushed out from the world of volcanoes, one in front and one behind, and their speed was extremely fast. Boom! Suddenly, a terrifying attack blasted out from the figure behind, blasting the back of the figure in front. The figure in front crashed to the ground in an extremely sorry state and spat out a mouthful of blood. Upon closer inspection, the person who fell to the ground in a sorry state was actually a delicate and pretty woman, and the figure who launched the attack from behind was a rather handsome young man. Jiao Wendong, you ungrateful bastard. If I hadn't saved you back then, and if I hadn't given you so many resources to cultivate behind my back, you wouldn't have today's achievements. Now, not only do you not care about our old friendship, you actually want to kill me for that, Zhu Rui. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? I'm your Tao companion. The delicate woman's face was dark green, and she should have been poisoned by an extremely powerful poison. At this moment, the poison had already invaded her knowledge. See, even if this man didn't make a move, this woman wouldn't live for long. The handsome man clearly knew that this woman would not live for long, so he simply stopped attacking. Instead, he looked at the woman with a smile and said, "Junior Sister Sue, I remember clearly what you did for me in the past. I will never forget it for the rest of my life." Junior Sister Zhu Rui is a disciple of the 6 Desires Palace. Although she is just an ordinary disciple, she is still a disciple of the 6 Desires Palace. As long as I can win her heart, I will have a chance to enter the 6 Desires Palace. Junior Apprentice Sister Sue, I know that Junior Apprentice Sister Zhu Rui is starting to have a good impression of me. As long as I work harder, the good thing between me and her will be done. Therefore, I won't allow her to know that I have a Tao companion. And you can't appear either. This will destroy the relationship between me and Junior Apprentice Sister Zhu Rui. You see, you love me so much. Just grant me this one time and die obediently. I will always remember your kindness to me in my heart. The pretty girl looked at the handsome man in disbelief. She never thought that the man in front of her would be so shameless. Now, she finally realized that she had fallen in love with a beast that was worse than a pig or a dog. I really regret not listening to the elders of my family. I actually fell in love with an ingrate like you. Even if I die, I will curse you to die a horrible death. The pretty girl's beautiful eyes were filled with the will to die. She slowly closed her eyes. She knew that she couldn't escape at this moment, so she simply gave up resisting. The handsome man laughed sinisterly and slowly approached the delicate and pretty woman. Just as he approached the delicate and pretty woman, the volcano beside them suddenly trembled violently. Then, the volcano suddenly exploded and a terrifying aura flowed out. Rumble. The moment the terrifying aura swept out, a huge purple illusory bridge appeared above the volcano. The first 6 steps of the illusory bridge were already lit up, and the 7th step was flickering like a star. It could be lit up at any time. The handsome man's pupils shrank. How could he not know that someone in the volcano had broken through? Moreover, it was the 7th step of the illusory sky. Moreover, from the aura that flowed out, it could be seen that this person's strength was absolutely terrifying. At least, it was not someone he could contend against. The handsome man glanced at the pretty girl who was about to die from the poison on the ground. His eyes flickered, but in the end, he still left this place. The pretty girl's poison had already penetrated deep into her sea of consciousness and even affected her soul. Even a ninth-step illusory sky expert couldn't save her. Even if the handsome man didn't do anything, the girl would die without a doubt. The handsome man was very cautious. He knew that killing someone while they were breaking through would definitely violate a taboo. So he left this place immediately. At the bottom of the volcano, Zhuan's divine sense naturally saw this scene. Although he sympathized with the girl, he was now at the critical moment of his breakthrough, so he definitely couldn't do anything. In addition, the handsome man was extremely cautious. He left this place without saying anything, so the handsome man took advantage of the opportunity to escape. However, from the conversation between the two, Zhuan also learned a lot of information. The most shocking thing was that Zhu Rui was actually a disciple of the Six Desires Palace. It seemed that after leaving this place, Zhuan would have to find Zhu Rui again. Of course, if he could meet this scumbag by Zhu Rui's side, Zhuan wouldn't mind getting rid of this scumbag. Zhuan took a step forward and stepped onto the sixth step of the illusory sky bridge. Then his gaze fell on the seventh step, his eyes full of determination. Boom! Zhuan lifted his foot and smoothly stepped onto the seventh step. At this moment, violent fluctuations appeared in the surrounding space, like a monstrous tsunami in the sea. It was monstrous and terrifying. Zhuan stood on the seventh step of the illusory sky bridge and silently felt the comfortable feeling of the surrounding starry sky energy pouring into his body. After advancing to the seventh step illusory sky bridge, the strength of Zhuan's main body had greatly improved. Even if he didn't rely on the avatar, Zhuan felt that the strength of his main body was comparable to a peak eighth step illusory sky expert. Putting away the illusory sky bridge, Zhuan took a step and arrived beside the pretty girl on the edge of the volcano. At this moment, the pretty girl's beautiful face was completely covered in pitch-black poisonous gas, looking exceptionally terrifying. Zhuan's right hand fell on the girl's forehead, and his gaze became extremely solemn. He discovered that the poison was extremely vicious and actually targeted the girl's soul. At this moment, 2/3 of the girl's soul had been contaminated by the poison. Even he couldn't do anything about it. When Zhuan's right hand fell on the girl's forehead, the pretty girl slowly opened her eyes. She looked at Zhuan in front of her and didn't feel any surprise. She knew that this strange man in front of her should be the senior who was cultivating inside the volcano. "Senior, can you do me a favor?" The pretty girl trembled and asked. "Help you kill that man?" Zhuan asked with flickering eyes. The pretty girl shook her head and said, "There's no need to trouble Senior with this matter. Jiao Wendong will definitely suffer the wrath of heaven in the future. The heavenly Tao will punish him. My daughter has another request." Zhuo Wen's brows furrowed, and he said with a nod, "You say then." Chapter 23:07. Violet Jadewen focused his eyes and noticed that the beautiful woman was holding a violet jade in her hand. Of course, violet jades weren't rare to Zhuowen, but Zhuowen noticed 2 lines on the violet jade. Violet energy transformed into violet mist, violet rain beneath violet mist. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice, and it was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through his mind while rumbling and exploding, causing him to be stunned on the spot. Zhuowen was truly too clear about these 2 lines. When he comprehended a trace of 9th level Tao insight in the Sky Clarity Immortal Domain that day, these 2 lines had automatically floated into appearance within his mind, and these 2 lines just happened to contain the truth of the 7th level, 8th level, and 9th level ultimate Tao insights. But now, Zhuowen had actually seen it in a violet jade that the beautiful woman had taken out. So how could he not be shocked? "Where did you get this violet jade?" Zhuowen held the beautiful woman's jade hand and asked slightly anxiously. The beautiful woman suddenly coughed up a mouthful of black blood, and the aura of death in her eyes grew denser. She withdrew a jade slip from her spirit ring while trembling, and then she passed it to Zhuowen and said, "There's an explanation of everything related to violet jades in here. This violet jade was obtained by the ancestor of my Sioux clan by accident. But my Sioux clan has declined more and more, and it was passed down to me in the end. But I've let down the elders of my clan and actually believe that ingrate, Jiao Wendong, causing me to fall to such an extent in the end. When she spoke up to hear, the beautiful woman's aura became even more dispirited, whereas a trace of pity flashed in Zhuowen's eyes, and he placed his right hand on her shoulder before surging divine energy surged into her body. But this was only treating the symptoms and not the root of the problem. The poison had already entered deep into the young woman's soul, and not to mention Zhuowen. Even an expert that ascended 9 times would probably be unable to save this woman. With the influx of divine energy, the beautiful woman's countenance became slightly rosy, yet the aura of death on her body grew denser. Thank you, Senior. This purple jade has a mysterious origin. Back then, because of this purple jade, our Sioux clan's grand ancestors' cultivation level rose steadily. Within 100 years, he broke through to the true God realm. Within 1,000 years, he broke through to the virtual sky realm. Within 10,000 years, his cultivation level reached the 8th level of the virtual sky realm. He was unparalleled in the 6 Desires heavenly region. He even founded the Sioux clan and became the overlord of the 6 Desires heavenly region. Moreover, when the ancestor reached the early stage of the 8th step, his strength was extremely terrifying. Even some late-stage cultivators were no match for the ancestor. It could be said that that era was the Sioux family's most powerful era. However, my Sioux family's old ancestor mysteriously disappeared, leaving only this purple jade to be passed down. However, the strange thing is that every time the Sioux family's patriarch obtained the purple jade, he would mysteriously disappear after his cultivation reached the void sky 8 steps. This has become a mystery of the Sioux family. Due to the disappearance of the Sioux family's patriarch generation after generation, the Sioux family has completely declined. However, this purple jade has never declined and has always remained in my Sioux family until it reached my hands. Now that I'm about to die, I don't want this purple jade to be lost, so I'm giving it to Senior. If Senior thinks it's an ominous item, you could take it back to the Sioux family and let them keep it. At this point, the delicate woman slowly closed her eyes and said, Senior, if you're interested in this purple jade, you can take it. However, Senior, please take my bones back to the Sioux family. At least, I want to return to my roots after I die. As she spoke, the delicate woman's vitality was completely cut off. Then, the woman slowly fell to the ground. Zhuowen looked at the delicate woman who had lost her vitality with a complicated gaze. This was a woman who was infatuated, but she loved the wrong person, which led to such a tragedy in the end. Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the divine flame enveloped the delicate and pretty woman. Then, he put her ashes into a jade jar. After doing all this, Zhuowen glanced at the purple jade in his hand. This purple jade still contained the energy of Tao Insight. However, the energy of Tao Insight was extremely weak now. Then he connected it to what the delicate woman said. When the Sioux family's ancestor obtained this purple jade, he should have relied on this purple jade to comprehend the energy of Tao Insight. Through the amplification of Tao Insight, this was why he was stronger than a cultivator at the 8th step of the void sky realm, at the 8th step of the void sky realm, at the 8th step. According to Zhuowen's conjecture, the gap between the 8th step and 8th step was quite large. However, the Sioux family's ancestor was able to defeat a cultivator at the 8th step. It was very likely that the Sioux family's ancestor's comprehension of Tao Insight had attained the 8th level. Zhuowen himself had comprehended the 7th level of Tao Insight, so he was relatively clear about the amplification of Tao Insight. The addition of 7th level Tao Insight at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm at the 8th step would at most be comparable to a cultivator at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm, and it was absolutely impossible for him to defeat a cultivator at the 8th step. But 8th level Tao Insight was different. Its amplification of strength was a level higher, and it was sufficient to defeat a cultivator at the 8th step of the Void Sky Realm. Of course, what Zhuan was more concerned about was the mysterious disappearance of the Su family's ancestor later on. It wasn't just the Su family's ancestor. Every single patriarch of a Su family that had inherited this purple jade had mysteriously disappeared after cultivating to a certain height. Zhuan knew that this ought to be closely related to the purple jade in his possession. More precisely speaking, it ought to be related to the energy of Dao insight within the purple jade. Moreover, Zhuan knew that this Dao insight was the energy possessed by the Sky Dao insight. Could it be that this purple jade is related to the Sky Dao insight? When he thought up to here, Zhuan's gaze became extremely cautious. He faintly seemed to have grasped something, yet also seemed as if he hadn't grasped anything. Perhaps I should make a trip to the Su family if I have a chance. Zhuan's gaze flickered. He really wanted to know why the Su family's ancestor had mysteriously disappeared now, as this was related to the key to whether he should continue comprehending the energy of Dao insight. In the beginning, Zhuan didn't feel that there was a problem with the energy of Dao insight. After all, the energy of Dao insight was truly magical and could increase any strength in the body. But now that he heard about the Su family's ancestor, Zhuan began to suspect the strangeness of this energy of Dao insight. In particular, the feeling that the Sky Dao insight gave him was too mysterious, and he couldn't trust the Sky Dao insight. Therefore, in order to confirm the thoughts in his heart, he needed to make a trip to the Su family. Let's leave this place first. Zhuan stood up and took a step forward with his right foot. It was as if there was no distance in the surrounding space under his feet. Zhuan shuttled through space after space, strolling leisurely. After taking a few hundred steps, he finally left the spatial area. An aura of extreme vicissitudes came from the surroundings, as if everything here was passing by. Although the surrounding things were still, it gave people the feeling that they were passing by. Zhuan felt that he was standing in a whirlpool of life that was gradually disappearing. His life seemed to be flowing away, and there was only a kind of panic and fear in his heart. Zhuan calmed his mind and stabilized his thoughts. Then he began to carefully size up the surrounding environment. The surroundings were barren. There was no light, no water, no life, no spiritual herbs. There was only an indescribable color. It seemed to be gray and hazy, but also seemed to have a trace of a very strange color. This is the color of time. Zhuan had such a thought for no reason. Chapter 23:08. Time Crystal. It seems that I've really entered the time law area. Zhuan looked at his surroundings and let out a light sigh. In his opinion, the law of time was superior to the law of space. Before the law of time, everyone was equal. After entering this area, Zhuan could clearly see that his life was flowing away much faster here than in the outside world. Zhuan found a quiet desert and took out a map from his spirit ring. There were detailed markings on the map. His gaze fell on the time law area and discovered that there was a time divine river between the time law area and the space-time law area. The time law and the time divine river was the most terrifying. It was said that cultivators who entered the time divine river would lose their lifespan hundreds of millions of times faster than in the outside world. Even though void sky cultivators had extremely long lifespans, they wouldn't be able to last more than a few days in the time divine river. They would gradually grow old and eventually die of exhaustion. Unless one mastered a certain amount of time law and slowed down the time flow in the time divine river, it was almost impossible to cross the time divine river. Zhuan looked around and discovered that the time divine river wasn't far away. The time law area wasn't big. There was only one space here, unlike the space law area, which had overlapping spaces that were densely packed like a maze. When Zhuan arrived at the time divine river, he discovered that there were 5 figures sitting cross-legged on the banks of the time divine river. Judging from the positions of the 5 figures, they were vaguely divided into 3 factions. 2 white-robed old men sat together in one faction. Another faction had a pair of Dao companions sitting on the other side. The last person was an extremely beautiful man. At this moment, The man was gently waving his folding fan as if he didn't see the hostility in the eyes of the other four people. Zhuan's arrival attracted the attention of the 5 people here. The other 4 people only glanced at Zhuan indifferently. When they discovered that Zhuan was only a void sky 7-step cultivator, they looked away without interest and ignored him. The beautiful man was still waving his folding fan. The moment he saw Zhuan behind him, a smile appeared on his face. He walked forward and smiled at Zhuan. "Brother Zhua, you're really extraordinary. You can actually cross the space law area so quickly. Brother Yao, you flatter me. If we're talking about speed, Brother Yao is much faster than me," Zhuan said with a smile. The beautiful man in front of him was none other than Yao Xiangjuan, whom Zhuan had met in the Quicksand family. Yao Xiangjuan shook his head and said, "Brother Zhua, you're too modest. I'm not much faster than you." "Right, where's Miss Zhu Rue?" Zhuan suddenly asked. Yao Xiangjuan was startled, and then he smiled and said, "That little girl Zhu Rue's strength isn't enough, so I found a relatively safe space in the space law area and let her cultivate there in peace. After I leave, I'll take her with me." Hearing this, Zhuan nodded, and then his gaze fell on the 4 people in front of the divine river of time. He said, "Why are the 5 of you sitting on the banks of the divine river of time? Could it be that you're waiting for something?" Besides Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation, which Zhuan couldn't see through, he discovered that the other 4 people's cultivation wasn't bad. Among them, the 2 white-robed old men were at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step, and the couple's strength was slightly weaker. The man was at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step, and the woman was at the intermediate stage of the Void Sky 7th step. Even in the outside world, the strength of these 4 people could be considered supreme powerhouses. Now, they were actually sitting on the banks of the river. Obviously, they were waiting for something. Yao Xiangjuan smiled and said, "The divine river of time is about to reseed, and that means that the time crystal will appear. Brother Zhua, what do you think we're waiting for?" Zhuan's pupils shrank, and his gaze fell on the divine river of time. No wonder Yao Xiangjuan and the other 4 people were waiting on the banks of the river. It turned out that the time crystal contained in the river was about to reseed. At that time, the time crystal contained in the river would appear. The time crystal was similar to the space crystal, but it was more precious and rarer than the space crystal. The time crystal was also a top-notch refining material. If the time crystal was refined into a divine artifact, the divine artifact would have a slight effect of freezing time. Just think about it. If your divine artifact had the ability to stop time, even if it was only for an instant, it could absolutely help you turn the situation around at a critical moment. Brother Zhua, I know that your strength is not bad, but the other 4 people are not simple either. After the divine river of time reseed, how about you and I join forces to seize the time crystal? Yao Xiangjuan suddenly transmitted his voice to Zhuan. Zhuan was startled. Then, he glanced at Yao Xiangjuan. After pondering for a moment, he nodded and said, "Okay, but I want 60% of the time crystal." Yao Xiangjuan was taken aback. Then, he smiled and said, "Then it's a deal. With Brother Zhua's strength, even if I only get 40%, it's still a profit." Zhuan looked at Yao Xiangjuan in surprise. This guy seemed to be very confident in him. Could it be that this Yao Xiangjuan really thought that he, Zhuan, was invincible in the world? By the way, Brother Yao, I met your sister, Yao Xiangjuan, in the space law area. I heard that she snuck out. Is that true? Zhuan stared straight at Yao Xiangjuan and suddenly asked. Yao Xiangjuan was a little surprised. Then, he became quite angry and said hatefully, "That little girl really snuck out. I already warned her not to run around, but she still didn't listen." Speaking up to here, Yao Xiangjuan cupped his fists at Zhuan and said, "Brother Zhua, where's your sister now? Can you give me an address?" Zhuan shook his head and said, "I can't give you the specific address. Moreover, the last time I saw your sister was a few months ago. I don't know where she went after that." Yao Xiangjuan looked disappointed and sighed. "It's my fault for not disciplining her well." "Brother Zhua, your sister didn't cause you any trouble, did she?" "No, I don't think your sister is a simple person. It's relatively safe in the river of time and space. It won't be too late for Brother Yao to find your sister after you leave the river of time and space, Zhuowen said with a smile. That's the only way, Yao Xiangjuan said helplessly. Whoosh! Suddenly, the ear-piercing sound of water was heard. Immediately, the river of time in front of them began to surge violently and then began to recede. The water level of the river of time on the shore kept falling and began to expose the riverbed below. Although the river water had not completely receded, Zhuowen had already seen the sparkling and translucent crystals below the riverbed through the river water. He knew that these should be time crystals. Not only Zhuowen, but Yao Xiangjuan, the two white-robed elders, and the pair of Tao companions also stood up and looked at the time crystal that was about to be exposed with burning gazes. Whoosh! The sound of water was heard again. This time, the water on the shore of the river of time finally receded completely, revealing the riverbed that was several feet wide. Brother Zhua, snatch it! The moment the riverbed was completely exposed, Yao Xiangjuan sent a message to Zhuowen with his mind. Then, his figure shot towards the riverbed at lightning speed. Chapter 2309. Snatchwin naturally rushed out immediately. The moment he rushed out, Zhuowen released his divine sense and immediately swept up many time crystals. What a powerful divine sense! Yao Xiangjuan's pupil shrank. He naturally noticed that Zhuowen had used his divine sense to sweep away many time crystals. Moreover, this sweep was much more than what they had. The other four people also noticed Zhuowen. Although the four of them were angry that Zhuowen, a mere void sky 7 steps ant, had swept away so many time crystals, they did not attack him. However, they did not attack Zhuowen. There were quite a number of time crystals here. They did not want to delay the opportunity to collect them because of such a small matter. After 10 breaths, the 6 people had plundered all the time crystals in the exposed riverbed at the edge of the divine river of time. As Zhuowen's divine sense was much stronger than the other 5 people's, he alone had obtained 1/3 of the total number of time crystals, far more than the other 5 people. Yao Xiangjuan came to Zhuowen's side and stared at the 2 white-robed elders and the couple in front of him vigilantly. He knew that the fight for the time crystals was far from over. Sure enough, after the other 4 people finished snatching the time crystals, their cold gazes landed on Zhuowen. One of the white-robed elders looked at Zhuowen sinisterly and said, "Little guy, hand over all the time crystals on you and get out of here immediately." Wei Hua, aren't you too merciful? Just kill this kid. Not only will the time crystals he snatched be ours, but this guy's spirit ring will also be ours. Another elder licked his lips and stared straight at Zhuowen like a hungry wolf staring at its prey. The pair of Tao companions stood silently at the side. Amongst the 6 of them, the combination of the 2 white-robed old men was undoubtedly the strongest. Although the couple also coveted the time crystals that Zhuowen had snatched, they did not want to go against the 2 white-robed elders. Therefore, they only planned to watch the show from the side. Brother Zhua, these 2 old guys are not easy to deal with. Moreover, these 2 old guys are proficient in combination techniques. We might be at a disadvantage if we go against them. Why don't we retreat? I have 2 escape talismans on me that are enough to help us escape, Yao Xiangjuan suggested. Although Zhuowen had killed 3 temple guardians before entering the river of space-time quicksand, and one of them was a late-stage void sky 8 steps expert. However, although the 2 white-robed elders in front of him were also late-stage void sky 8 steps, each of them was stronger than the temple guardian. In addition, the 2 cooperated well and were proficient in combination techniques. He did not think that they had much of a chance of winning against these 2 white-robed elders. Brother Yao, don't worry, I'll take care of these 2 people. If you feel that it's inappropriate, you can leave first, Zhuowen said coolly. Yao Xiangjuan was stunned. He looked at Zhuowen's back with a complicated expression. He did not know where this young man got his confidence from. He actually dared to take on 2 people by himself. However, Yao Xiangjuan did not leave. Instead, he stood side by side with Zhuan and said, "Brother Zhua, since we are allies now, I have no intention of abandoning you. Since you want to fight, I'll accompany you." Zhuo nodded. He had a better impression of Yao Xiangjuan in his heart. Yao Xiangjuan had considered his feelings at all times. This was something that Zhuan appreciated. "Humph, let's go. They're just two little guys who smell like milk. Wei Hua, let's kill them together." The tall, white-robed elder snorted coldly. He took the lead and rushed towards Zhuan. A trident had appeared in his hand at an unknown time. The moment the tall, white-robed elder rushed out, the elder named Wei Hua also rushed out and rushed towards Yao Xiangjuan. Zhuan drew his king's sword and slashed out, engaging in a fierce battle with the tall old man. This tall elder's strength was indeed stronger than the temple guardian from before. However, Zhuan had already advanced to the void sky 7th step. His strength was much stronger than before. To put it bluntly, Zhuan did not even need to use phagocytosis to kill this tall elder. However, Zhuan did not use his killing move. His attention fell on Yao Xiangjuan, who was not far away. This Yao Xiangjuan was quite mysterious. In addition, he had never been able to see through Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation. This made Zhuan very curious as to whether Yao Xiangjuan was a match for Wei Hua. At the same time, he would be able to understand more about Yao Xiangjuan. Moreover, he knew from Zhao Wendong that Zhu Ruwei was a disciple of the Six Desires Palace. Since Yao Xiangjuan was Zhu Ruwei's senior brother, he was probably also a disciple of the Six Desires Palace. Bang! 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 Yao Xiangjuan instantly clashed with Wei Hua. Yao Xiangjuan's weapon was a divine sword that emitted an azure light. Moreover, Zhuan found that the divine sword style was a little feminine. However, when he thought of Yao Xiangjuan's face that was even more beautiful than a woman's, it was not strange for him to have a feminine divine weapon. Wei Hua's cultivation was at the late stage of the void sky 8th step. His strength was not weaker than the tall elder fighting Zhuan. However, Yao Xiangjuan dealt with him with ease and did not show any signs of being at a disadvantage. Zhuan looked deeply at Yao Xiangjuan. He thought that this Yao Xiangjuan was indeed not simple. From Yao Xiangjuan's temperament, he could see that Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation time was not much longer than Zhuan's. However, he had this kind of battle strength. He could definitely be considered a monster. Where are you looking? You're actually distracted in battle. You're simply courting death. The tall elder who was fighting Zhuan saw that Zhuan's attention was on Yao Xiangjuan, who was not far away. He immediately felt that he was being looked down upon. He flew into a rage and mercilessly attacked Zhuan with the trident in his hand. Bang! 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 In an instant, countless halberd shadows turned into a monstrous sea, setting off waves that were tens of thousands of feet high. Suddenly, Zhuan was swept in. His Dao companions, who were standing nearby, saw the terrifying halberd moves released by the tall old man, and their expressions changed. The tall elder's move was extremely terrifying. Even if it were the two of them, they might not be able to escape unscathed if they wanted to block this move. The two of them knew that the white-clothed young man was finished. The endless halberd shadows sprinkled down and instantly drowned Zhuan's figure. However, not long after the halberd shadows drowned Zhuan, a terrifying sword light suddenly blasted out from the depths of the halberd shadows. Then, the sword light continued to condense and turned into a huge sword dragon that whistled out. It was Zhuan who had used the 8th move of the Tao of Destruction sword art, Sky Slashing Sword Dragon. What? This guy? The tall elder looked at this scene with some astonishment. His face quickly turned ugly. He realized that the young man in front of him was not as simple as he seemed on the surface. The young man's strength was far beyond his imagination. Bang! The tall elder suddenly blasted out the trident in his hand and hit the sword dragon. Then he groaned and retreated dozens of steps before he could barely stabilize himself. Old man, I'm not going to play with you anymore. I'll give you a chance to live. Take this move of mine. Then you only need to hand over the time crystal, and you can leave. Zhuowen held the sword in his right hand and looked down at the tall elder. The killing intent in his eyes was so substantial that it radiated out. Suddenly, the surrounding space was filled with killing intent. Chapter 23:10. Count the tall old man's eyes flickered. He no longer looked down on the white-clothed young man. Instead, he was afraid of him. Of course, while he was fearful, he wasn't fearful to the point of being afraid of the might of this kid's sword strike. I admit that you're very strong. You must have been hiding your cultivation before. However, even so, it's impossible for you to kill me with one strike, the tall old man sneered. Oh, is that so? From the looks of it, you're very confident that you can withstand my sword. All right then, take a good look at this sword that's going to kill you. What exactly is it like? Zhuowen's eyes were still indifferent. He slowly raised the king's sword and placed it on his right shoulder. Then, he stomped his right foot and disappeared like a ghost. When Zhuowen reappeared, he was already 10 meters in front of the old man. Zhuowen's sword had already slashed down. Rumble. The moment the sword slashed down, the surrounding space began to collapse and collapse. It was as if space had been completely obliterated at that moment. It was the last move of the Destruction Dao sword art. It was also the strongest move, Genesis Splitter. The power of Genesis Splitter was related to space. This time, Zhuowen had completely comprehended the law of space. The power of Genesis Splitter was much stronger than before. The tall old man's face finally changed completely. It was filled with fear, confusion, and regret. The strike was too powerful. The entire space was annihilated. He could not even move his limbs. Moreover, after the space was annihilated, waves of terrifying sword chi dispersed into the annihilated space. Then all of them blasted into his body and tore his body into pieces. The tall old man took one last look at the sword-wielding young man. The regret in his heart erupted like a volcano. Unfortunately, regret was useless. Zhuowen looked calmly at the tall old man who was annihilated by the sword chi. After comprehending the spatial law, Zhuowen knew that the power of the Destruction Dao sword art's final move, heaven-splitting earth-splitting, would increase a lot. In addition, his cultivation level had advanced to the Void Sky 7th level, so killing a late-stage Void Sky 8th level expert would not be a problem. Of course, Zhuowen would not be as relaxed as he was now if he had reached the peak of the Void Sky 8 ascensions. Not far away, the couple's faces were pale as they involuntarily retreated dozens of steps. Their eyes were filled with fear as they looked at the white-clothed youth who had taken away the old man's spirit ring. Senior. When Zhuowen arrived in front of the couple, the two hurriedly bowed and greeted him. This person was able to easily kill the tall old man, which meant that this person's strength was above the two of them. Even though Zhuowen looked very young, in this world where strength reigned supreme, those who had reached the top would always be first. Hand over the time, Crystal. I won't make things difficult for you, Zhuowen said calmly. The couple looked at each other and sighed softly. They had no choice but to take out all the time crystals they had just obtained and hand them over to Zhuowen. After taking the time crystals, the couple did not stay here for long. They cupped their fists at Zhuowen and left. Yao Xiangjuan and Wei Hua, who were originally fighting on the side, naturally saw that the battle had ended. Yao Xiangjuan's eyes were calm. He did not find it strange. After all, Zhuowen had already killed a late-stage Void Sky 8th level expert in front of him. It would be strange if that tall old man was Zhuowen's opponent. However, when he saw Zhuowen deal with the tall old man so easily, Yao Xiangjuan was still a little shocked. He remembered that Zhuowen had not killed the Temple Guardian so easily. Zhuowen's strength has increased a little compared to before, Yao Xiangjuan said in his heart. On the other hand, Wei Hua was greatly shocked and had the intention to retreat. Wei Hua roared angrily and suddenly punched out. Then, this punch actually split into thousands of punches in an instant. The punches were like overlapping waves as they fiercely smashed in front of Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan's eyes narrowed. He coldly snorted and slashed out with his sword. Instantly, the sword light turned into an incomparably huge blue whale, blocking the countless punches in front of him. At the same time, the instant Yao Xiangjuan blocked the punches, he took out a handful of talismans from his spirit ring and threw them at Wei Hua without holding back. Every single one of these talismans was not ordinary. They all contained extremely terrifying energy. When a handful of talismans were thrown out, continuous explosions erupted from the talismans. Wei Hua was caught off guard and was enveloped by the explosions. When the explosions gradually subsided, Wei Hua's entire body became pitch black. He was in an exceptionally sorry state. He fell to the ground, spat out a mouthful of blood, and did not get up again. Zhuan glanced at Wei Hua. He knew that Wei Hua's injuries were too serious. He was afraid that he would not live for long. Although Void Sky cultivators had the Void Sky Bridge, and their vitality was extremely tenacious, the talismans thrown out by Yao Xiangjuan were not ordinary. The power of the explosions went deep into the soul. Wei Hua's main injuries were not external, but the depths of his soul. With Zhuan's powerful divine soul, he naturally could easily detect how serious Wei Hua's injuries were. This was also why he was certain that Wei Hua would die without a doubt. Thinking of this, Zhuan glanced at Yao Xiangjuan again. This person was indeed not simple. Although Yao Xiangjuan's strength might be on par with Wei Hua during the battle, his trump card were extremely powerful. Just now, when Yao Xiangjuan threw out so many talismans, even if it was Zhuan, he would probably be in a sorry state. Of course, he would not die in such a sorry state like Wei Hua. Brother Zhua, I still underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Yao Xiangjuan put away Wei Hua's spirit ring and came in front of Zhuan. His eyes were filled with fear and surprise. Zhuan smiled slightly and said, "It was just luck." Yao Xiangjuan smiled embarrassedly. He naturally did not think that this was really Zhuan's luck. However, since Zhuan did not want to talk about this topic, Yao Xiangjuan would not pursue it. Brother Yao, take this time crystal. I said that we would split it 40 to 60. Zhuan casually threw a spirit ring to Yao Xiangjuan. The latter caught the spirit ring with slight surprise. He immediately checked it and said, "Brother Zhua, you really want to split it with me? These were all obtained by you. I'm a man of my words. How could I take advantage of you in this matter?" Zhuan said indifferently. Yao Xiangjuan looked deeply at Zhuan and smiled. He also took out the time crystal from Wei Hua's spirit ring and threw it to Zhuan. He said, "This is 60% of the time crystal in Wei Hua's spirit ring. Brother Zhua, please count it." Zhuan took the time crystal and nodded. He directly put it into the spirit ring without any intention of counting it. Chapter 23:11. Snatch again, Brother Zhua, what are your plans? Are you going to leave this place or stay here to comprehend the rules of time? Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhua and asked, "I want to cross the divine river of time," Zhua said in a deep voice. Yao Xiangjuan was shocked, then shook his head and said with a smile, "Brother Zhua, the divine river of time is too terrifying. Even if you have comprehended the rules of time, the flow of time in the divine river of time is still faster than the outside world. Moreover, we don't know how wide this divine river of time is so." Zhua smiled and did not answer. Instead, he took out a praying mat and sat cross-legged on the shore. He began to comprehend the rules of time here. This was originally an area of time rules, and the power of time rules was emitted everywhere. Moreover, Zhua could also feel that the flow of time around him was faster. Clearly, it was because of the rules of time. If the rules of time on the shore were so terrifying, then there was no need to mention the divine river of time. Zhua did not know anything about the rules of time, so he naturally would not rashly enter the divine river of time. Yao Xiangjuan looked at Zhua, who was sitting not far away, and smiled bitterly. He knew that Zhua had already given him the answer. Yao Xiangjuan also found a secluded place, took out a praying mat, and sat down cross-legged. His gaze fell on the divine river of time in front of him, and he said in a daze, Brother Joie, could it be that you want to cross the divine river of time for the space-time roulette? Joie's eyelids twitched, but he did not open his eyes. Instead, he fell into silence. Yao Xiangjuan did not mind, but continued to talk to himself. I once heard my master say that the most precious thing in the space-time river of quicksand is not the space crystal or the time crystal, but something called the space-time roulette. The speed of the space-time roulette is the fastest in the world. No one can compare to it. Even the top-flight divine tool in the heavenly domain cannot compare to the space-time roulette. Yao Xiangjuan said. Zhuo's heart stirred, and he was filled with curiosity about the space-time roulette. From Yao Xiangjuan's tone, Zhuowen could tell that the space-time roulette was a top-notch flying artifact. It could also be said that it was the fastest treasure in all of the heaven domains. However, Zhuowen was somewhat ignorant. He had not come to the river of space-time quicksand for the space-time roulette. Instead, he had come for the space-time key. As for whether the space-time roulette and the space-time key had any definite connection, Zhuowen was not very sure. If he could cross the divine river of time this time, Zhuowen would definitely look for the space-time key first. Then, if he had the chance, he might look for the so-called space-time roulette. Time ticked by. Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan sat on the shore, trying to comprehend the laws of time. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. During this time, many cultivators came out of the spatial law zone and came to the shore of the divine river of time. As Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan's auras were not weak, most of the cultivators did not deliberately offend Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan. Of course, there were some who offended them, but they were basically dealt with by Xiao He, who was guarding Zhuowen. For a time, the area around Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan became a forbidden area for other cultivators. Most of the cultivators who entered the temporal law zone were there to comprehend the laws of time. Therefore, many cultivators followed Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan's example and sat in this space, silently comprehending the laws of time, hoping to gain something. Among them, there were also some impatient cultivators who knew that there were good things like time crystals in the divine river of time. They could not suppress the greed in their hearts and entered the divine river of time. In the end, the moment these cultivators entered the divine river of time, their hair turned white, their skin became dry like tree bark, and their vitality was constantly washed away by the waves of the divine river of time. In the end, they died of old age in the divine river of time. Such an outcome was like a basin of cold water that was poured over most of the cultivators' heads. These cultivators no longer had any wishful thinking in their hearts. Instead, they obediently comprehended the laws of time first. The divine river of time would ebb and flow once every 10 years. It had been 10 years since the last ebb, and the second ebb was about to begin. At this moment, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. His eyes flickered with a bright light. In the past 10 years, he had been comprehending the laws of time all the time. He was not stingy in using up all the time crystals he had obtained. He also had a certain understanding and comprehension of the laws of time. Not enough. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. His gaze fell on the divine river of time in front of him again. He knew that the divine river of time was about to ebb again. Every time it ebbed, many time crystals would appear on the riverbed on the shore. If he wanted to quickly comprehend the laws of time, he could only rely on time crystals. Although Zhuowen had gained a lot in the past 10 years, he knew that his comprehension of the laws of time was still superficial. If he wanted to have a deeper understanding, he would need enough time crystals and sufficient time. Yao Xiangjuan also opened his eyes. He glanced at Zhuowen and saw the latter nodding and smiling slightly. He also knew what Zhuowen meant. Whoosh! The waves on the shore of the divine river of time suddenly surged. Then, the water level on the shore was falling, revealing a part of the sparkling and translucent time crystals. As the water level continued to fall, more and more time crystals were exposed. Whoosh! 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 Before the water level had completely receded, many cultivators on the shore could not hold back and rushed out to snatch the exposed time crystals. Zhuowen and Yao Xiangjuan were no exception. Juan's divine sense gushed out and turned into a big hand. In an instant, many time crystals were swept away. His speed was far faster than other cultivators. When the water level completely fell, the riverbed finally appeared in front of everyone. Everyone went crazy. Some cultivators even started to fight in order to snatch the time crystals. The scene became extremely chaotic. Juan did not care about those cultivators who were fighting at all. Instead, he focused on grabbing the time crystals and collecting as many time crystals as he could. After a while, the time crystals on the exposed riverbed were basically all plundered. Apart from the bare riverbed, there were no more time crystals. As for Juan, he had snatched more than half of the time crystals. Although Yao Xiangjuan could not compare to Zhua when in terms of the number of time crystals he had snatched, it was still quite a number. At the very least, Yao Xiangjuan was quite satisfied. The rest of the time crystals were basically divided among other cultivators. However, the general situation was that there were too many monks and too little gruel. There's also a large number of cultivators who did not get a single time crystal at all. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.